She walked into that cafe looking like nobody. No designer bag, no driver, no entourage.
That does sound promising.
Just a woman in jeans and a plain jacket. And the table next to her laughed. They whispered. They assumed. And they were so completely, catastrophically wrong about who she was. But before Avery Sterling could walk out that door and disappear back into the world that only knew her net worth, a stranger stood up. A man with tired eyes and calloused hands and absolutely nothing to gain. And he told them to shut up. That was the moment everything changed, for both of them. If you've ever been underestimated by people who thought they had you figured out, stay with me. Like this video, drop your city in the comments, and let's see how far this story travels. The cafe was called Briar and Bean, and it was the kind of place that tried too hard. String lights in October. A chalkboard menu with words like artisanal and hand-forged, written in looping cursive that somebody clearly practiced. Exposed brick walls. A playlist cycling through acoustic covers of pop songs that were better as pop songs. Landon Pierce pushed open the glass door at 6:47 in the evening, 13 minutes early, and immediately regretted agreeing to any of this. He stood in the entrance for a moment with his jacket still half unzipped, scanning the room out of old habit. The same sweep he used to do when walking into new job sites, checking exits, checking load-bearing structures, checking what might go wrong. The cafe was about 2/3 full. Couples mostly. A group of women on what looked like a bachelorette pre-game. A few solo laptops nursing cold oat milk drinks. He found a corner table and sat down. The waitress came over almost immediately. Young, maybe 23, with a nose ring and an expression that suggested she was working her way through something more important than this shift. "Just water for now," Landon said. She didn't write it down, just nodded and disappeared. He sat back and looked at his phone. One text from his sister, Dina. "She's lovely. You'll like her. Don't make that face you make." He typed back, "What face?" Dina replied with 3 separate emoji. He put the phone face down on the table. The honest truth was that Landon had not wanted to come tonight. He hadn't wanted to come last Tuesday when Dina first mentioned it, and he hadn't wanted to come this morning when Chloe had looked up at him over her cereal bowl and said, very seriously, "Dad, you should wear the blue shirt." As if she'd been briefed, as if the whole thing was a coordinated operation. He was wearing the blue shirt. He was here. He ordered the water. That was all he was prepared to commit to. 3 years had passed since Julia died, and Landon had gotten fairly good at explaining it to people in the least painful way possible. The car accident, the November rain, the other driver who walked away fine, all of that. But he'd never gotten good at the part that came after the explaining. The part where people looked at him with that particular mixture of sorrow and discomfort and didn't know what to do with their hands. He didn't tell most people. He'd gotten selective about it. What he told people instead was that he was a single dad, that he ran a small construction company, Pearson Company, that had been growing slowly but steadily for the last few years, that his daughter Chloe was 7 years old and recently obsessed with sharks, and also, inexplicably, with competitive baking shows that she was absolutely not old enough to watch, but he'd stopped fighting that battle around episode 4 of the most recent season. He told them easy things, safe things. The other stuff, the grief that didn't announce itself anymore, but just showed up sometimes in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, the specific weight of reading bedtime stories to a kid who sometimes reached up and patted his face in the dark as if checking he was still there, that stuff was not for first dates, or second dates, or probably third. He was reading the menu for the 4th time without absorbing any of it when the bell above the door chimed and a woman walked in. He knew immediately, without knowing how he knew, that this was her. She was maybe 5 feet 4 inches, dark hair pulled back in a way that looked like she'd done it in the car, jeans, slightly worn at the knees, a charcoal gray jacket that had seen some weather, no jewelry that he could see from here except small studs in her ears. She carried a plain canvas bag over one shoulder, the kind that you could buy at any bookstore for $12. She stood near the hostess stand and scanned the room with quick, sharp eyes. Not nervous exactly, more like a person taking inventory. There and gone in 2 seconds flat. Then her gaze landed on him, and something shifted in her expression. a tiny recalibration. He lifted a hand. She walked over. Landon? She said, as if checking. Yeah. Avery? Yes. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down without a lot of ceremony. Set her bag on the floor. You're early. So are you. 13 minutes. Same. A beat. She looked at him with those inventory eyes again, and he had the brief, uncomfortable feeling of being assessed, though not unkindly. Your sister told me you'd make a face, she said. He blinked. I'm not making a face. You were, a little, when I walked in. That's just my face. She seemed to consider this. Fair enough, she said. The waitress appeared and Avery ordered a black coffee without looking at the menu. Landon asked for the same, mostly to have something to do with his hands. In the first few minutes, the conversation moved through the standard checkpoints. Weather. Terrible. The cafe? She'd been here once before. His sister, yes, a force of nature, no apologies. He waited for the moment when she'd ask what he did for a living in the loaded way that people sometimes asked. Fishing, really, for the number at the bottom of the net. But she didn't. She asked him where he grew up, and when he said Millhaven, out east, she said she'd driven through it once on her way to somewhere else. What was the somewhere else? He asked. A conference, she said, and then shifted the subject in a way that was practiced enough that he almost didn't notice it. Almost. He filed that away. The table beside them was a group of three, 2 men and a woman, late 30s, dressed in the kind of casual that takes effort to achieve. They'd been there when Landon arrived, and they were loud in the particular way of people who've had 2 drinks on empty stomachs and forgotten that other people exist. He'd been tuning them out. Then he caught a sentence. No, I'm just saying, look at her. She's clearly not from around here. A man's voice, amused, low enough to be deniable. Landon didn't look up. What do you mean? The woman at that table leaning in. I mean, who shows up to a date in that? Did she bike here? A short laugh. Some people just don't. Landon's jaw tightened. Avery had gone still. It was a subtle thing, the kind of stillness you'd miss if you weren't paying attention. Her coffee cup was raised halfway to her mouth and stayed there. Her eyes didn't move to the other table. She kept looking at Landon, but she wasn't seeing him anymore. She was listening. The man at the other table continued, quieter now, though not quiet enough. I'm just saying Marcus is going to take one look and Marcus isn't coming, the other man said. Right, but if he were, that's enough, probably. A half-hearted correction from the woman. I'm just making an observation. Avery set her coffee down, very carefully. The kind of careful that means something different than careful. I'm going to use the restroom, she said, and her voice was completely level, which somehow made it worse. She stood and walked toward the back of the cafe, not looking at the other table. Not looking at anything. Landon watched her go. Then he looked at the 3 people at the next table. The man who'd been talking was maybe 35, square-jawed, with the satisfied look of someone who thought being quiet enough was the same as being decent. Landon waited until Avery turned the corner, out of sight. Then he leaned forward slightly in his chair. Hey, he said. The man looked over. Sorry? The woman you were just talking about. Landon kept his voice even, conversational, like he was asking about the specials. She can hear you. The man's expression flickered. I wasn't. You were! Landon wasn't angry. That was the thing. He wasn't performing anything. He was just tired, the way a person gets tired of something that keeps happening over and over in every room in every city until it feels like furniture. She's been sitting right there the whole time. It was a private conversation, at a volume that wasn't private. The woman at the table looked down at her drink. The second man had gone carefully neutral. The first man held Landon's gaze for a moment, the specific social negotiation of 2 people deciding whether this becomes a thing. And then he turned back to his table and picked up his glass, and that was that. No apology. But the talking stopped. When Avery came back, she sat down and wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. Her knuckles were not white. She was fine. She was clearly, competently fine, in the way that some people got very good at being fine. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know. It wasn't a big deal. It also wasn't a small deal. She looked at him for a moment, really looked, for the first time since she'd sat down, like she was recalculating something. People assume a lot, she said carefully, based on how someone looks. Yeah, he said. I know. It doesn't usually bother me. It bothered you, he said, not unkindly. She pressed her lips together, not denying it. He appreciated that. It bothered me, she admitted, quietly. Not because they were strangers, because it's never strangers. It's always... She stopped, started again. People see what they want to see, and then they decide who you are based on it. And you don't fit what they expected. I never do. He nodded slowly. He understood that, though probably for different reasons than hers. For what it's worth, he said, you don't owe me anything for having a normal reaction to being treated badly. She blinked at him. That's a strange thing to say on a first date, she said. I'm strange, he said, without apology. For the first time since she'd sat down, something relaxed in her face. Not a smile yet. More like the thing that happens right before a smile, when the decision is still being made. Dina said you were direct, she said. Dina talks too much. Now she did smile. Small, involuntary, like it got out before she could stop it. They stayed for another hour. Landon hadn't planned on staying another hour. He'd planned on a polite 45 minutes and an exit with dignity. But something happened after the moment with the table next to them. Some invisible recalibration on both sides. And the conversation stopped being a conversation and started being something else. Something less formal. More like two people sitting across from each other at the end of a long day, not performing. He told her about Chloe. He didn't plan to exactly, but she asked, not the checking the box way, but like she actually wanted to know. And once he started, he found it difficult to stop, which almost never happened. She's 7, he said, but she thinks she's about 45. She has opinions about things, like real opinions, with reasoning attached. She told me last month that I should reorganize the kitchen cabinets by frequency of use, and she was not wrong, which was the annoying part. What did you do? I reorganized the kitchen cabinets. Avery laughed at that, a real one, short and surprised. She's smart, he said, and the pride in his voice was not something he tried to hide. She reads above her grade level. She's got this notebook where she draws sharks and labels all their parts. He paused. She's going through a shark phase. How long has the shark phase been going on? 6 months. I've learned more about great white sharks than I ever expected to need. What's the most interesting thing you've learned? He thought about it. They don't sleep the way we think of sleeping. They keep moving. Their brain doesn't turn off. Something moved across Avery's face at that. She turned her coffee mug in a slow circle, once, twice. That sounds exhausting, she said. Chloe thought it was the coolest thing she'd ever heard. She didn't tell him what she did. He noticed. He wasn't making a case about it. People were entitled to privacy, especially on first dates. But he noticed that every time the conversation edged toward her work, she steered it somewhere else. She asked about his company. She asked about the kinds of projects Pierce and company took on. She asked smart follow-up questions, not the interested to be polite variety, but the kind that came from someone who actually processed information quickly. He told her about the Community Learning Center. It slipped out, honestly. He hadn't planned to talk about it. It was a half-formed dream more than a plan. A space for kids in the Millhaven corridor who didn't have consistent access to tutoring or after-school programs, something between a library and a workshop, with actual resources and actual people who showed up every week. He'd had the vision for it for 2 years and had done almost nothing with it except sketch the floor plan once on a napkin and then lose the napkin. There's a building on Keene Street, he said, old textile warehouse. Been empty for about 4 years. The bones are solid. I could do most of the renovation work myself, or with my crew, if I could get the financing. Have you applied for any grants? I looked into it. There are programs. He rubbed the back of his neck. I don't have a lot of time to sit down and figure out the application process. And there's no guarantee. And right now the business is going through some things, so. What kind of things? He shook his head. Nothing I need to unload on a first date. She didn't push it. But she looked at him in that way again, the inventory look, thoughtful and quick. And he had the sense that she had filed it, the same way he'd filed her pivot around talking about her work. Two people paying attention. Two people not quite saying everything yet. At 8:30, the cafe started thinning out. The bachelorette group left in a wave of laughter and pink sashes. The table next to them had cleared out 40 minutes ago, the man with the square jaw not looking at Landon on his way out. The waitress came with the check unprompted. Landon reached for it. "Split it," Avery said immediately. "I've got it." "I said split it." He looked up. She was looking at him with an expression that was pleasant and completely immovable. "You're going to be stubborn about this," he said. 50-50. "It's not stubborn, it's fair." He let her put her half down, though it was slightly more than half, and he suspected she knew it. They walked out together, and the October air hit them like a flat hand, cold, dry, with the smell of fallen leaves and someone's wood-burning stove a few blocks away. "This was not the worst evening I've had this year," Avery said. "That's generous." "I mean it as a compliment. My bar has been set by circumstances." He smiled despite himself. "Mine too." They stood on the sidewalk outside Briar and Bean for a moment, that particular end of a first meeting awkwardness where nobody quite knows whether to shake hands or hug or say something meaningful or just let it be what it was. "Your daughter sounds like a good kid," Avery said. "She's the best person I know." Something in Avery's expression shifted at that. Something quiet and a little unguarded, in and out in 2 seconds. "Tell her the shark thing is impressive," she said, "for what it's worth. She'd want to explain the full circulatory system to you in return." "I'd probably survive it." He looked at her for a moment. "Dina will ask me how it went." "What will you tell her?" "I'll tell her it went well." He paused. "Did it go well?" She met his eyes. "Yeah," she said, and the word was simple and direct and didn't have any performance in it. "I think it did." Landon drove home through streets slick with early autumn rain, the windshield wipers going back and forth in the dark, and tried to figure out what had just happened. He pulled into the driveway at 9:15. The kitchen light was on. Dina had come over to watch Chloe, as arranged, and he could see through the front window that the television was going. Some baking competition from the sound of it. He sat in the car for a moment with the engine off. He thought about the way Avery had gone still at that table, the careful movement of the coffee cup, the way she'd said people see what they want to see, quietly, like someone describing a condition they'd been living with for a long time. He thought about the way she'd pivoted every time the conversation moved toward what she did for work. Not lying, exactly. More like a person who'd learned to protect something. And he thought, and he pushed the thought away as soon as it arrived, but it came back, that the last time he'd sat across from someone and thought there is more going on here than they're telling me had been Julia on their second date, when she'd finally admitted she was terrified of birds and had spent their entire first date near a park fountain braced for pigeons. He sat with that for a second. The comparison. The small, quiet ache of it. Then he got out of the car, walked up the porch steps, and opened the front door to the smell of microwave popcorn and Chloe's immediate shout, "Dad, this guy just made fondant butterflies, and they're actually beautiful. Come look." And the night folded back into ordinary, and that was fine. That was good. He didn't tell Chloe much about the date. She was 7 and terrible at being indirect, and Landon knew if he gave her any information she'd have architectural plans drawn up by morning. So he said it was nice, and the coffee was good, and the person was fine, and Chloe looked at him with the specific 7-year-old expression that meant, "I know you're not telling me everything, but I'm choosing to let it go for now." Dina was less tactful. She texted him at 9:47 p.m. "So?" He replied, "It was good. Define good, normal good, coffee good, not awkward." "Did you ask for her number?" He looked at his phone. Then he realized, with a slight jolt, that he hadn't. And she hadn't asked for his. They'd said goodbye on the sidewalk and gone in separate directions, and neither of them had mentioned it. He started to type a response to Dina. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. "This is Avery. Your sister gave me your number 3 weeks ago. I probably should have led with that." He stared at it for a moment. Then he typed back, "Good to know. I also have a question. Okay. The building on Keene Street, is it listed anywhere or do you just know it exists? He sat with that for a moment. The question was specific. The question was the kind a person asked when they'd already been thinking about something, not just making small talk. I know it exists, he typed. I've looked at it from the outside about a dozen times. Have you ever been inside? No, you need a contact for that. The property management company is... I found it, she wrote back. Greenpath Holdings. I'm going to make a call tomorrow. He blinked at his phone. Why? There was a pause, longer than a typing pause. Then, you said you didn't have time to figure out the application process. Consider this figuring it out. He didn't know what to say to that. He tried 3 different responses and deleted all of them. Finally, he just typed, "You don't have to do that." Her reply came fast. "I know." And then, "Good night, Landon." He set the phone down on the nightstand. Outside, the rain had picked up again. He could hear it on the roof, the gutters running, the specific sound of late October making its presence known. Down the hall, Chloe had her nightlight on. The little projector that threw sharks across the ceiling in slow rotation, a birthday gift from 3 months ago that she still insisted on every single night. He lay there in the dark for a while. He was not the kind of man who read into things. He'd built his entire professional life on looking at structures as they actually were, not as he wanted them to be. A wall was either load-bearing or it wasn't. A foundation was either solid or it wasn't. You didn't wish it otherwise. But the thing about tonight, the thing that kept pulling at him in the dark, was not the conversation about the learning center or the standoff with the man at the next table, or even the text messages. It was the moment just before she smiled. That tiny instant where the decision was still being made, when the guard was still up but had started to slip, and he'd seen something on her face that was very tired and very real. He knew that look. He'd worn it for 3 years. And over the next 2 weeks, they texted more than they met. This was not planned. It just happened the way things happen when 2 people have found a particular frequency and neither of them wants to lose it by pushing too hard. She'd send something in the morning, usually early, which he noted. He'd reply between job site visits. She asked smart questions about the Pearson Company projects he mentioned. He asked about the Greenpath call. She said she'd left 2 messages and was waiting to hear back, which was not ideal. "You don't have to keep following up on that," he told her, the 3rd time they met in person. A Thursday lunch at a sandwich place near his job site. Nothing planned. She'd texted that she was in the area. "I left 2 messages," she said. "It's fine. I just don't want you to feel obligated." She looked at him with the inventory eyes. "Do I seem like someone who does things out of obligation?" "No," he admitted. "You seem like someone who does things because she decided to." "Correct." She took a bite of her sandwich. "So stop apologizing for it." He still didn't know what she did. He'd asked once, lightly, early in the 2nd week, "So what is it you actually do?" And she'd said, "I work in tech," and then asked him a question about roof load calculations that was somehow specific enough to be genuine, and they'd gone from there. He hadn't pushed. There was something he respected about it, actually. The world he moved through, construction, contracting, small business, was not a world where people hid their money. If anything, it was a world where people overstated it, inflated it, used it as a measure of weight and seriousness. The fact that Avery Sterling, whoever she actually was, had sat across from him in a $12 canvas bag and talked about children's learning centers and shark biology and the Greenpath property management hold music without once referencing her income bracket. That meant something. He didn't know what exactly, but it meant something. His accountant called on a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks after the Briar and Bean date, and Landon took the call in his truck outside a job site in the rain. "I need you to come in," said Ray, who was 61 years old and had been Landon's father's accountant before he was Landon's, and who did not dramatize things. "This week, sooner if you can." "What's wrong?" "The Caldwell contracts." A pause. "Landon, 3 of them have been terminated, and there's a penalty clause being invoked on the Riverside build." Landon stared out the windshield at the rain. "That's not possible," he said. "We were on schedule. We passed every inspection." "I know." Caldwell signed off on the Riverside walkthrough himself. "I know." but the termination letters cite code violations and a pattern of safety infractions. Ray paused again. There are no safety infractions on record. I pulled everything. It's not documented because it didn't happen. The rain hit the roof of the truck in a flat, steady rhythm. Somebody's making it up, Landon said. That's what it looks like. Why? Ray was quiet for a moment. I don't know yet, but the Caldwell Group has been doing business with a new development consortium. They came in about 8 months ago, Meridian Properties. I've heard the name. They've been acquiring commercial real estate in the Millhaven corridor, the Keene Street area mainly. There's been some pressure, I've heard from other contractors, to clear out the smaller operators who have any foothold in that zone. Landon's hand tightened on the phone. Keene Street. The building. The bones-are-solid warehouse he'd described to Avery over coffee 3 weeks ago. He sat there in the rain for a long time after he hung up. Lawson. He didn't tell Avery right away. Part of that was pride, pure and simple. The specific grinding pride of a man who'd built something with his own hands and didn't want to admit it was being taken apart by someone he'd never even met. Part of it was that he still didn't fully understand the shape of it, and part of it, the part he was least willing to look at directly, was that Pierce and Company was all he had outside of Chloe. It was the thing he'd built after Julia died, the thing he'd thrown himself into as a way of surviving the first year. His crew, 6 guys who'd been with him for at least 2 years, who showed up every morning and did good work and trusted him, they had families too. If the company went down, it wasn't just Landon. He sat with that in the evenings, after Chloe was asleep, at the kitchen table with the financial documents spread out in front of him and a cold cup of coffee he kept forgetting to drink. The numbers were not good. Without the Caldwell contracts, the company's runway was shorter than he wanted to admit. He could manage for 4 months, maybe 5 if he pulled back on some overhead. After that, without new work coming in, and new work was slow to come in when someone was actively spreading bad information about your safety record, it was a cliff. He put the documents away before Chloe woke up in the mornings. He made her breakfast and listened to Shark Facts and drove her to school, and then sat in the pickup outside for 10 minutes before he could make himself go deal with the day. On the 7th day of this, Avery texted him. You've gone quiet. Everything okay? He started to type. Fine, just busy. He stopped, deleted it, typed. Not really. Can we meet this week? She replied in 40 seconds. Tomorrow, noon. You pick the place. They met at a diner on the edge of his work territory. Booths, laminate tables, coffee in white ceramic mugs that were slightly chipped. He was already there when she arrived, which was becoming a pattern, and she slid in across from him without ceremony and looked at him. Tell me, she said, no preamble. So he did. He laid it out methodically, the way he laid out job site problems. Here's what happened. Here's what I know. Here's what I don't know yet. He told her about the Caldwell contracts, the fabricated safety violations, Ray's theory about Meridian Properties, and the Keene Street corridor. She listened without interrupting. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. He'd noticed she always did this, always both hands, and she listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Meridian Properties, she said. The way she said it was strange, flat but not empty, more like someone touching a bruise to confirm it's there. You know them? I know of them. Her eyes were somewhere else for a second. Then they came back to him. How long has this been going on? The termination letters came in 3 weeks ago, but I think the groundwork was being laid for longer than that. Are you going to fight it? I'm trying to figure out how. He turned his coffee mug in a slow circle. The problem is I don't have documentation of the original arrangement with Caldwell, nothing that proves the safety violations were invented. I have my own records, but those can be argued. You need someone else's records, she said. I need records I don't have access to. She nodded slowly, and that inventory look was in her eyes again, measuring, calculating. But it was different now, more internal, like she was measuring something in herself. I'm going to look into this, she said. You don't... Landon. She said his name with a precision that stopped him. Let me look into this. He studied her face. She was not offering out of politeness. She was not making a gesture. She was looking at him with the steady, focused look of someone who had already decided and was only now telling him about it. "Why?" he asked. She held his gaze for a moment, then she looked down at her coffee. "Because it's wrong," she said, "and because I can." He drove home that evening with the October dark coming down early and Chloe riding in the back seat, telling him about a disagreement she'd had with her best friend over which was more impressive, a great white shark or a blue whale. "The blue whale is bigger," she explained with the patient resignation of someone explaining gravity. "But the great white is dangerous. They're different kinds of impressive." What did Madison say? She said size matters more, which is a very immature position. He almost laughed. "Did you tell her that?" "I said it was a matter of perspective, which is the grown-up way to disagree." He watched her in the rearview mirror. 7 years old, hair in 2 uneven pigtails because she'd done it herself this morning, and he hadn't had the heart to redo it, explaining the nuanced taxonomy of impressiveness with total seriousness. He thought about the Learning Center, about the warehouse on Keene Street, about Avery saying, "Let me look into this," with that particular calm in her voice, about not knowing who she was, and somehow trusting her anyway. "Dad?" Chloe said. "Yeah? Is Avery your friend?" He kept his eyes on the road. "Where'd you hear about Avery?" "Aunt Dina?" "Of course." "Is she?" He thought about it for a second. "Yeah," he said. "I think so." Chloe considered this with great seriousness. "Does she know about sharks?" "I haven't asked her." "You should ask her," Chloe said. "That's important information." He nodded. "I'll ask her." In the rearview mirror, Chloe nodded once, satisfied, and looked back out the window at the passing dark. And Landon drove on through the cold October night, toward a house with the kitchen light left on, and tried to figure out what he was walking toward and whether he was ready for it, knowing, in the way a man knows things he doesn't want to say out loud, that ready or not, something had already begun. Avery did not go home after the diner. She sat in her car in the parking lot for 6 minutes. She checked the clock twice, and turned over what Landon had told her with the same methodical attention she brought to quarterly earnings reports and boardroom disputes, and the kind of problems that had dollar signs attached to them. The difference was that those problems never made her feel like something was sitting on her chest. This one did. Meridian Properties. She said the name quietly in the empty car, testing it, the way you'd press on a loose tile to see how far it moved. She knew Meridian, not casually, not distantly. She knew them the way you know a tenant who's been in your building for 3 years and pays on time and never causes visible trouble, and somehow, despite all of that, makes the whole floor feel slightly wrong whenever they're around. Meridian was one of Sterling Technology's largest commercial real estate partners. They managed 3 of the company's regional office campuses. The relationship was clean on paper, 6 years old, mutually profitable. She pulled out her phone and called her head of legal affairs. It was 7:40 in the evening. Marcus Hale picked up on the second ring because Marcus Hale always picked up, which was one of the things she paid him for. "I need a full background pull on Meridian Properties," she said, without greeting. "Not their public filing. I need the transaction history, acquisition patterns, contract disputes, anything involving smaller contractors in the Millhaven corridor in the last 18 months. A pause. "That'll take a day or two. Tomorrow, end of day." Another pause. "I'll make it work." "Don't flag it internally," she said. "Just us for now." She hung up and sat there another minute in the dark parking lot. Through the diner window, she could see the booth where she and Landon had been sitting. A busboy was clearing the table, the white ceramic mugs going into a tub. She thought about the way Landon had laid it all out. No drama, no inflation, just the facts in order. The way a person talks when they've been sitting alone with something for too long and have worn all the emotion off it, down to the plain shape of the problem. He'd looked tired. Not sleep tired. The other kind. She knew the other kind. She started the car and drove back to her penthouse, and she did not think about the fact that she had, at no point in the last 3 weeks, told Landon Pierce who she actually was. She was good at not thinking about things she'd decided not to think about yet. Dina's voice on the phone the next morning was immediately suspicious. "You want to meet Chloe," she said, not as a question. "I'd like to," Avery said.
She was standing at her office window, 42 floors up, looking out at a city that was doing what cities do in November, going gray and bright and loud all at once. If Landon's comfortable with it, why are you asking me instead of him? Because I don't know if there's a protocol. I don't want to. She stopped. She was not in the habit of not knowing the right way to say something, and the sensation was mildly irritating. I don't want to step wrong. There was a silence on Dina's end that was warm in a way silences could sometimes be. He doesn't bring people around Chloe, she said, in case you were wondering. I wasn't wondering. You were a little. Avery turned away from the window. Will you just tell me if it's a bad idea? It's not a bad idea, Dina said. Ask him yourself. He'll say yes.
He's been talking about you, you know. Not a lot. He doesn't talk a lot, but he talked. Avery set that information carefully aside in the place where she kept things she wasn't ready to examine directly. Thank you, Dina. You're welcome. Also, when are you going to tell him? The question landed flat and clean, the way Dina's questions tended to. Tell him what? Avery said. You know what. She did know what. When it's the right time. Those words, Dina said pleasantly, are what people say when they're hoping the right time never arrives. Avery didn't answer that. She said goodbye and hung up and stood at her window for another minute looking at the city. The right time did not arrive that week, or the following week, which was the second week of November, and which brought with it a cold front that turned the Millhaven streets the color of pewter, and also, more relevantly, the first time Avery met Chloe Pierce. It happened on a Saturday afternoon, which she suspected was not accidental. Landon had suggested it carefully, in the way he did things he'd thought about more than he let on. A trip to the Natural History Museum, low stakes, public place, nothing that required anyone to perform. He'd mentioned it on a Wednesday and spent 3 days not following up, which she'd read correctly as him giving her room to back out if she wanted to. She didn't want to. The museum was crowded in the particular way of Saturday afternoons with families, strollers, noise, the specific chaos of children who have been told they cannot touch anything and have interpreted that as a challenge. Avery arrived first, again, and found Landon and Chloe coming through the main entrance 3 minutes later. She recognized Chloe before Landon introduced them, which made no logical sense except that the kid looked exactly like her father in miniature. Same dark eyes, same slight tilt to her chin, same quality of watching a room before committing to it. She was wearing a puffy purple jacket and carrying a small backpack with a shark on it, because of course she was. Chloe stopped in front of Avery and looked up at her with a directness that most adults couldn't manage. "My dad says you're smart," she said. Avery glanced at Landon, who was doing something very hard with his expression. "Did he?" Avery said. "He said you're good at figuring things out." Chloe considered her further. "Do you know anything about sharks?" "A little," Avery said. "I know they don't sleep the way we do. They have to keep moving." Something shifted in Chloe's face, a rapid internal assessment that reached a conclusion. "Okay," she said, and reached out and took Avery's hand in the matter-of-fact way that 7-year-olds sometimes took your hand, as if it was simply the next logical step, and started walking toward the exhibits. Landon, behind them both, looked like he'd been slightly winded. Avery glanced back at him over her shoulder. He shook his head once, slowly, and she had to look away before she smiled at a degree she didn't mean to. Chloe narrated the entire marine exhibit, not in a showing-off way, more the way a person gives a tour of their own house. Comfortable, certain, with occasional digressions that had no clear destination but were somehow never boring. She knew things, specific things, with Latin names that she pronounced carefully and facts attached that she verified were accurate because, as she explained with some solemnity, her teacher had told her once that facts need sources, and her source was a book about ocean biology that she'd gotten from the school library and renewed 4 times. "You've had it 4 months?" Avery asked. 5. "But the librarian lets me because I take care of it." A small pause. "And because I made her a card on her birthday." "Strategic kindness," Avery said. Chloe thought about that. "Yeah," she said, in a tone that suggested she'd never called it that, but found the label accurate. Landon was walking slightly behind them, hands in his jacket pockets. He'd been quiet in a way that was not uncomfortable, more like a person watching something they hadn't expected and were still processing. At the shark display, a massive tank with two sand tigers moving in slow circles, Chloe pressed both palms flat to the glass and went entirely still. "They're older than trees," she said, without turning around. "What is?" Avery asked. "Sharks, as a species. They existed before trees did. Trees came later." She watched the larger shark complete a turn. "I think about that a lot." Avery watched her watching the tank. "What do you think about it?" "That it means being old doesn't mean being behind. It means you figured something out early." She turned around and looked at Avery with the same directness as before. "My dad's been doing the same things since I can remember. He doesn't change a lot, but he's not behind either. He's just figured his things out." Landon, 2 feet away, said nothing. Avery looked at Chloe for a moment. 7 years old, with a shark on her backpack and a library book renewed 5 months running, explaining evolutionary persistence at a fish tank on a Saturday afternoon. "I think that's a good way to see it," Avery said. Chloe nodded once and turned back to the tank. They got hot chocolate in the museum cafe afterward, and Chloe fell asleep in her chair with her head on Landon's arm before she'd finished half of it. The way young children sometimes simply collapsed without warning, mid-thought, like a phone hitting zero battery. Landon didn't move his arm. He just sat there and drank his coffee left-handed and watched his daughter sleep. "She does this," he said quietly, "runs at full capacity and then just stops." "She's extraordinary," Avery said, and she meant it without decoration. He looked at her. The look was direct and serious, the way he got when something mattered. "She liked you," he said. "She doesn't do that fast." She held my hand immediately. "Yeah." A beat. "That surprised me too." Avery turned her coffee cup in the slow circle she'd picked up without noticing. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "When you talk about her, your voice changes." He looked at his daughter, not her. "I know. Not softer. Just," she searched for the right word, "more certain. Like she's the one thing you don't have doubts about." He was quiet for a moment. Outside the cafe window, November rain had started, thin and gray. "She's the one thing I don't have doubts about," he confirmed. Avery sat with that. There was something in it she recognized from a distance, that quality of having one solid point when everything else felt variable, though her version of it looked nothing like his, and lived in spreadsheets and quarterly targets instead of a sleeping kid with a shark backpack. "I haven't been fully honest with you," she said. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out the way things sometimes did when she'd been carrying them too long. Landon looked at her then, patient, not alarmed. "About what you do," he said. It wasn't a question. She should have known he'd already worked out the shape of it. "I didn't lie," she said carefully. "I work in tech, that's true. But it's not complete." No." He waited. She opened her mouth, and then her phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. She reached for it automatically, the reflex of someone whose phone call volume was in a different category than most people's. And she saw Marcus Hale's name on the screen and the specific shorthand they used for urgent, 3 words. "Need to talk, tonight." She looked up at Landon. "I have to take this," she said, and hated the timing with a completeness that surprised her. "Go ahead." She stepped away from the table toward the cafe entrance. Marcus was already talking before she got the phone fully to her ear. "The Meridian poll came back," he said. "Avery, it's bad." She kept her voice flat. "How bad?" "They've done this before. 3 other small contractors in the last 14 months, all of them operating in corridors Meridian was targeting for acquisition. All of them hit with fabricated code violations through their development partners. One of them folded. One is still in litigation. One walked away." She looked back at the table. Landon was repositioning Chloe's head on his arm, carefully, not waking her. "There's more," Marcus said. "Tell me." "Meridian's primary silent investor, the one who's been funding the Millhaven corridor expansion." A pause. "It's Harlan Cross." She stood very still.
Harlan Cross was 64 years old and ran a private real estate consortium that had been a Sterling Technologies partner for 6 years. He sat on 2 industry boards she also sat on. They'd had dinner at a charity function 8 weeks ago, and he'd congratulated her on Sterling's Q3 numbers, and she'd thanked him, and neither of them had indicated that anything was wrong. "Harlan Cross," she said. "Yes. He's been funding a campaign to destroy a small construction company in Mill Haven. Based on the transaction trail, yes. And it's not just Pierce and Company. There are at least 4 other small operators in that zone who are being pressured out." She turned away from the cafe entirely, facing the museum corridor. A group of children were running past, trailing a harassed-looking teacher. "Pull everything," she said. "Every transaction, every communication we can access, every contract touchpoint between Sterling and Meridian going back to the beginning. That's 6 years of, I know how long it is, Marcus. Pull it." "Avery?" His voice was measured. He was one of 2 people in her professional life who could use that tone with her. "If you move on this, if you pull the Meridian contracts and go public with the Cross connection, you're looking at shareholder disruption, potential litigation, and the board will—" "I know what the board will do." "Then I need to ask you if you're sure." She looked back through the cafe window at Landon. He'd gotten a napkin from somewhere and was dabbing something off Chloe's jacket sleeve, probably hot chocolate, with the focused, unself-conscious attention of a man who'd done 10,000 small tasks like this and never thought about whether anyone was watching. "I'm sure," she said. She didn't tell him that night. She told herself it was because the moment had been broken and the next right moment hadn't appeared yet, and she wasn't going to do it badly when she could do it right. These things were all true. They were also, she was honest enough to admit, convenient truths. What she did instead was go back to the table and drink the last of her coffee and help Landon carry a barely conscious Chloe to the car in the museum parking garage, the kid's head on her father's shoulder and the shark backpack dangling from his elbow. And she said goodbye in the gray November rain and drove home and sat in her kitchen for 2 hours with the Meridian files open on her laptop and made herself look at all of it. 6 years of invoices. Acquisition maps with the Mill Haven corridor highlighted in a progression of dates. The 3 previous contractors, she pulled what public records existed and matched them to the Meridian timeline, and it lined up, clean and nauseating. Pierce and Company was the 4th. The corridor ran directly through Keene Street, the warehouse, the building with the solid bones and the dream Landon had sketched on a napkin and lost. She closed the laptop. She poured herself a glass of water because she needed something to do with her hands, and she stood in her kitchen at 11 p.m. and thought about Chloe asleep in a purple jacket and the way she'd pressed her palms against the Shark Tank glass and said, "I think about that a lot." And she thought about what it would mean to let Landon find out about all of this on his own. The slow financial bleeding, the impossible fight against a machine that had been doing this for over a year before he ever knew it existed. And she thought about what it would mean to stop it. She was not naive about her own position. She knew that acting on this meant consequences. The board would not be neutral. Harlan Cross had allies, and she'd made something that wasn't quite enemies over the years, but wasn't quite nothing either. The specific opposition of people who'd found her competence inconvenient. She'd built Sterling from a 2-person startup in a rented office to a publicly traded company worth $4.2 billion. And she'd done it by being smarter than most people expected a 30-year-old to be, and by making hard calls without flinching. This was a hard call. She knew it. She was making it anyway. What she hadn't quite dealt with, what she was going to have to deal with, and soon, was that Landon didn't know who she was. He'd been talking to her for nearly 2 months about his business struggles and his learning center dreams and the company that someone was trying to take from him, and she'd been listening, and she'd been doing things, and he didn't know that she had the leverage to do any of it. When he found out, and he was going to find out, because that was the direction everything was moving, his reaction was going to depend entirely on how he found out. She understood that. She understood it very specifically, in the way she understood contract clauses and risk matrices. The what was not the only thing that mattered. The how mattered too. She went to bed at midnight. She slept badly. But what nobody who knew Avery Sterling in a professional context would have predicted was that she was genuinely good with children.
She'd have said the same thing herself once. She'd spent her 20s in the particular tunnel vision of building something from nothing, which left almost no bandwidth for anything outside the work. She'd had relationships. She was human, she'd had relationships, but they'd been with people who understood that Sterling Technologies was not a job, but a life. And eventually those relationships had ended in the specific way that things ended when two people had been looking in different directions for long enough. She'd filed children away in the mental category of probably, someday, not a current consideration, and moved on. Chloe Pierce dismantled that filing system in about 37 minutes. Over the following weeks, into December now, cold enough that the breath showed, Avery found herself present for things she hadn't been present for in years. A Saturday making grilled cheese in Landon's kitchen while Chloe sat on the counter and explained the circulatory system of a hammerhead shark, her small feet kicking against the cabinet doors in an irregular rhythm. A Tuesday pickup from school where Chloe had a disagreement with a classmate about a science project that Chloe recounted with the precision of someone preparing a legal brief. A Sunday afternoon where the three of them watched 2 episodes of The Baking Show, which was exactly as chaotic as Landon had described, and Chloe fell asleep again between them on the couch, her feet in Avery's lap. The ease of it alarmed her, slightly, not the ease itself, but what the ease meant. She'd gotten careful over the years about things that felt easy, because the things that felt easy had a tendency to be the things she couldn't afford to lose. Landon noticed, of course. He didn't say much about it. This was not a man who said much about things he was still working out, but she caught him watching sometimes, quiet and observant. She'd be in the middle of something ordinary, helping Chloe with a reading assignment or arguing mildly with her about whether bioluminescent fish or electric eels were more evolutionarily impressive, and she'd look up and find him watching from the other side of the room with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not suspicious, not guarded, more like a man adjusting his picture of something he thought he already knew. One evening in mid-December, after Chloe was in bed, he made tea. He was a tea drinker in the evenings, which she'd known for weeks and still found mildly unexpected. And they sat in the living room with the lamp on and the street noise coming in low through the windows. "She talks about you," he said. "Chloe, after you leave." "What does she say?" "Last week she told me that you think like an engineer, but talk like a person." He looked at his mug. "I told her that was a compliment. She said she knew." Avery was quiet for a moment. Outside, someone was walking a dog in the cold, and she could hear the tap of its nails on the sidewalk faintly through the glass. "Landon." "Yeah. The thing I haven't told you, about what I do." She looked at her hands. "I'm going to tell you soon. I just want you to know that the reason I didn't lead with it wasn't—" She stopped. "It was never strategy. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't managing you. I was just tired of being the thing that people see first." He turned his tea mug slowly. He didn't ask her to explain more, and he didn't rush to reassure her, both of which she appreciated. "Okay," he said finally. "That's it? I figured there was a reason." He glanced at her. "You're not careless. Whatever it is, you had a reason." She held his gaze for a moment. Something ached in her chest a little, in the specific location where trust and risk overlapped. "The Meridian investigation," she said carefully. "I'm further along than I've told you." His expression didn't change. He waited. "I have documentation of a pattern, 4 contractors, fabricated violations, all in corridors Meridian has been acquiring." She paused. "And the funding source. I know who it is." The stillness that came over him was not the stillness of the coffee cup at the other table, contained and controlled. This was different. This was the stillness of someone absorbing a hit and deciding what to do with it. "You've been working on this for weeks," he said. "Yes." "While we were—" "Yes." He stood up and walked to the window. She didn't fill the silence. He needed it. "Okay," he said finally, back still to her. "I know that's a lot to sit with." "It is." He turned around. His face was not angry. It was something more complicated than anger, which was somehow harder. "I need you to tell me the rest, all of it, what you know and what you're planning to do about it." She nodded, and she did. She told him everything. The Meridian transaction trail, the 4 contractors, Harlan Cross, the Sterling Technologies connection that she hadn't wanted to say out loud before now, in this room, to this man who'd been trusting her for weeks without knowing the full weight of what he was trusting. He listened to all of it. He asked 2 questions, both precise, both about things she'd wondered if he'd catch. The timeline of the Keene Street acquisitions relative to the Caldwell terminations, and the nature of the penalty clause that Ray had flagged. She answered both. When she finished, the lamp was the only light on in the room. "There's a shareholder meeting in January," she said. "I can bring this there, publicly. It ends Cross's partnership with Sterling, and it puts the documentation into the record in a way that gives you legal ground to fight the Caldwell terminations. It also blows up a 6-year business relationship," he said. "For you." "Yes." "And your board won't—" "No. They won't be happy." She didn't look away from him. "I know what I'm doing." He looked at her for a long time, long enough that she felt it. "The person I thought I was getting to know," he said quietly. "Is that the same person?" "Yes," she said. No hesitation. He nodded slowly, looked at the window, the dark street, the lamp reflection in the glass. "You should have told me sooner," he said. Not accusing, just honest. "I know." He picked up his tea, which had gone cold, and looked at it like he was considering whether to say something else. Then he put it down and looked at her again, and something in his expression had shifted slightly. Not softer exactly, but with less of the complication in it. "I'm going to need some time," he said. "With this. With all of it." "Okay. Not—" He rubbed his face. "Not away time. Just thinking time. You understand the difference?" She did understand. She understood it better than she expected to. "I do," she said. He nodded. The lamp sat between them, throwing light in both directions, and neither of them moved to leave. The thinking time lasted 9 days. Landon didn't disappear. He texted, briefly and practically. A question about whether she'd eaten when she mentioned working late. A photo Chloe had apparently insisted on sending of a particularly impressive page in the ocean biology book. A one-line message on a Thursday that said Ray thinks we can file a countercomplaint if we have the documentation. "Does Marcus have anything notarized yet?" That last one she answered in 4 minutes flat, because it told her what she needed to know. He was processing, not retreating. There was a difference, and she'd learned to read it. She spent those 9 days finishing what she'd started. The January shareholder meeting was 22 days out when Marcus delivered the full compiled file. 340 pages of transaction records, acquisition maps, contractor complaint histories, and a set of internal communications between Meridian Properties and a shell company connected to Harlan Cross's private holdings that Marcus had found through a chain of registered agents that took his team 4 days to trace. The communications were not ambiguous. They used careful language, the language of people who understood they might be read later. But the meaning was not ambiguous. She read all 340 pages. She read them twice. Then she called Marcus and said, "Prepare the presentation for the January meeting. I'm bringing this to the full board." Marcus was quiet for 3 seconds, which was a long time for him. "The board includes 2 members with cross-adjacent interests." "I know. Avery. Henderson and Park are both going to push back hard. Henderson's been on the board since your Series B. He'll frame this as reckless." "He can frame it however he wants," she said. "The documentation speaks." "And the Meridian contracts? Terminating 6 years of commercial partnership is going to hit the Q1 projections." "I know what it'll hit." Another pause. "I just need to make sure you've run the full scenario." "I've run it," she said. "Every version of it. This is the one I'm choosing." She hung up and turned back to the window. 42 floors, the city going about its business below in the cold January light, and stood there for a moment with the particular stillness of a person who has made a hard decision and is waiting for the second guessing to arrive. It didn't arrive. That, more than anything, told her she was right. She told Landon the meeting date on a Saturday. They were in his kitchen again. She'd noticed that most of their important conversations happened in his kitchen, which she thought probably said something about him, about the kind of man who had a room in his house that functioned as the center of gravity. Chloe was at a birthday party, and the house had the particular quality of a place that was built for noise operating in temporary quiet. January 14th, she said, 10 a.m. Sterling Technologies headquarters. He was leaning against the counter with his coffee. He looked at her steadily. And after? After, the documentation goes into the official meeting record. Marcus files the evidentiary package with Cross's legal team the same afternoon. They'll have to respond. She paused. And we give Ray's counter-complaint everything he needs. They'll try to bury it, he said. Cross has lawyers who get paid to make things disappear. He does, she agreed. But this goes into a public shareholder record. That makes it significantly harder to bury. He turned his coffee mug in a slow circle. She'd picked up that habit from him somewhere along the way without noticing. What does this cost you? He asked. Not abstractly, specifically. He wanted the number. The Meridian Partnership accounts for about 8% of our commercial real estate revenue. Q1 takes a hit. The board is going to be unhappy in a loud and organized way. She set her own mug down. Henderson will probably call for a confidence vote. He's been looking for a reason. Landon's expression shifted. A confidence vote is, I know what it is. You could lose your position. I could, she said. I won't, but I could. He looked at her for a long moment. The kitchen was quiet around them. The refrigerator hum, the radiator clicking, the sound of a truck passing on the street outside. Why? He said. She'd known the question was coming. She'd been preparing an answer for 2 weeks. A clean, reasonable answer about corporate ethics and legal obligation and the documented harm to multiple contractors, all of which were true. She looked at him, and she gave him the true answer instead. Because it's wrong, she said. And because you're... She stopped. Because I'm not going to sit on 340 pages of evidence and do nothing with it because it's inconvenient. He didn't look away from her. That's not the whole answer. No, she admitted. He didn't push her to finish it, which was, she was finding, one of the things about him that consistently undid her, the way he made room for things without demanding them. Tell me about the confidence vote, he said instead. Realistically, Henderson needs 7 votes on a 12-member board. He has 4 solid. He might get a 5th from Park. That still leaves him 2 short, and the other members have seen 6 years of results. She was steady saying it, which was how she knew it was true and not just how she wanted it to be. It's noise, loud noise, but noise. You've done this before. Not this specifically, but navigating board opposition, yes. A slight pause. I built this company in rooms full of people who thought I was too young, too inexperienced, or both. I know how to be in those rooms. He nodded slowly, looked at his coffee, looked back at her. Avery, he said, and the way he said her name, just her name, nothing attached to it, had a weight she felt somewhere in the middle of her chest. I need to tell you something. Okay? When you told me 2 weeks ago about Sterling, about who you are, all of it, he stopped, rubbed the back of his neck, which she'd learned was the physical gesture that meant he was working through something he wasn't sure how to say. I wasn't angry because you kept it from me. You seemed, I know how I seemed. A brief, flat smile. I'm working on that, he set his mug down. I was thrown because I'd been talking to you about the business, about the company, about all of it, and the whole time you had the context to understand exactly what it meant. And I didn't know that. He paused. It felt like an imbalance, like I'd been showing you something without knowing what I was showing you. She understood that precisely. I should have told you earlier. Yeah, he said. Not to be harsh, just honest. But I also... He stopped again. I understand why you didn't. I've been thinking about it. What you said. Being tired of being the thing people see first. She said nothing. I see you, Sham, he said. I want you to know that. Not the company. Not the number. He met her eyes. You. The radiator clicked. The refrigerator hummed. The truck that had been outside was long gone. She had built a company that employed 2,400 people. She had sat in rooms with senators and fund managers and twice-decorated engineers and people whose names were on university buildings. She had given speeches that were live-streamed to industry conferences and written about in publications she'd been reading since she was 19.
Nobody had said, "I see you" to her in a very long time. Maybe ever, like that. She picked up her coffee mug because she needed something to do with her hands. "Okay," she said. Her voice was even. She was almost certain it was even. He looked at her with something in his expression that was almost amusement. "You're terrible at receiving things," he said. "I know. I'm not great at it either, for what it's worth. We're well matched that way." "Apparently," he said. Chap. The January 14th meeting fell on a Tuesday. Avery arrived at Sterling Technologies headquarters at 7:45 a.m., 95 minutes early. She had been awake since 4:30, not from nerves exactly. She'd been doing high-stakes presentations since she was 24, but from the specific alertness of a person whose body understood that today was a line between one kind of thing and another. She went through the presentation once more in her office, alone. Marcus came in at 8 and sat in the chair across from her desk and watched her go through the slides in silence, which was his way of being useful without being in the way, and she appreciated it. "Henderson called me last night," Marcus said when she finished. She looked up from her laptop. "And?" "He asked me to encourage you to consider tabling the Meridian material for a subcommittee review. He framed it as protecting the company from a rushed decision." "What did you say?" "I said I'd pass along his concern." A pause. "Which I just did." She looked at him for a moment. "Thank you, Marcus, for passing it along, for 6 weeks of work that made this possible." He nodded once, professionally. Then, slightly less professionally, "For what it's worth, I think this is right. What you're doing." She looked back at her laptop. "Let's make sure the right thing is also the effective thing." The boardroom was on the 40th floor, 2 floors below her office, and it had floor-to-ceiling windows on the north wall that looked out over the city. 12 chairs, 12 nameplates, a presentation screen at the far end. The room filled in the way boardrooms filled, controlled, measured, the specific formality of powerful people performing their own seriousness. She knew all 11 of them. She'd hired 4 of them personally. Henderson, at 62, was silver-haired and committee-weathered, and had the practiced neutrality of someone who'd spent decades in rooms like this turning opinions into process. He took his chair at the south end of the table and opened his folder without looking at her. Park sat 2 seats down from him and also didn't look at her, which told her Marcus's read had been correct. The remaining 9 ranged from cautiously curious to openly attentive. Chen, who'd been with the board since year 3, caught her eye briefly and gave the smallest nod. She filed it. Standard business consumed the first 40 minutes. Q4 reporting, a subsidiary audit, a vote on a vendor renewal that passed 8-3. Then her item appeared on the agenda, listed as partnership review. Meridian Properties, which was accurate as far as it went. She stood. "What I'm presenting today is not a recommendation," she said. "It is documentation of a pattern of conduct that directly implicates one of our commercial partners and requires action from this board." Henderson straightened slightly. She clicked to the first slide. She spent 22 minutes going through it. She did not editorialize. She let the documents carry the weight, which they did: the transaction trail, the acquisition maps, the contractor complaint histories, the shell company chain that led back to Harlan Cross. She presented the 4 contractors: names, dates, the fabricated violations, the outcomes. She presented Pierce & Company as the 4th currently active case. The room was quiet in a way that boardrooms were rarely quiet. The specific quiet of people reading what was in front of them and understanding that it was real. When she clicked to the final slide, she said, "I am recommending immediate termination of the Sterling Meridian Commercial Partnership, full cooperation with any resulting legal investigation, and referral of this documentation to the relevant oversight bodies." She sat down. Henderson let 3 full seconds pass. "This is a significant action based on a very rapid internal investigation." "The investigation took 6 weeks," she said. "The documentation is sourced and verified." Cross is a respected figure in this industry. Cross is funding a coordinated campaign to eliminate small contractors from a real estate corridor through fabricated safety violations. She kept her voice level. "The documentation does not suggest this. It establishes it. There are legal questions about how some of this material was obtained." "Marcus." She glanced at him.
Marcus, from his seat along the wall, produced a one-page summary and slid copies down to each board member. All materials were obtained through licensed commercial due diligence, public records requests, and registered agent filings. Full sourcing is in the appendix. Henderson looked at the page. His expression didn't change, but something around his jaw tightened. Park spoke for the first time. The Q1 projection impact is an 8% reduction in commercial real estate revenue, Avery said. I have a mitigation model in the supplementary materials. 8% is not. 8% is recoverable, she said. Our reputation for ethical conduct, if we knowingly sit on this and it surfaces externally, is not. The room absorbed that. Chen spoke from his end of the table. I move to vote on the recommendation. A second came from Okafor, who'd been reading quietly throughout and who Avery had a great deal of respect for. Discussion? Said the chair. Henderson looked at her. The look was not hostile. It was the look of a man recalculating, trying to find the version of this that preserved the most of what he wanted. She'd seen that look before, on different faces, in different rooms. This exposes the company to retaliation, he said. Cross has resources. He'll fight this. He'll fight it in the open, she said, which is exactly where it should be fought. The vote was 9-2. The news moved fast. By 3 p.m., Cross's legal team had called Marcus. By 5 p.m., 2 financial news outlets had picked up the story from the meeting record, which was public by law. By 7 p.m., Avery's phone had received 43 messages from numbers she recognized and 11 from numbers she didn't, and she'd answered none of them because she was sitting in her car in the parking structure beneath Sterling headquarters, giving herself 10 minutes before she drove anywhere. She was not shaking. She wanted to be clear with herself about that. She was not shaking, and she was not having second thoughts, and she did not regret the vote or the 22 minutes or the look on Henderson's face when it came back 9-2. She was just very, very tired. She took out her phone and called Landon. He picked up on the third ring. There was noise in the background, but the TV, Chloe's voice asking something, the everyday sound of a house in the early evening. It passed, she said, 9-2. A beat. Then, are you okay? I'm tired. That's not the same as okay. I know. She leaned her head back against the headrest. I think I'm okay. I'm in my car. Where are you? Parking structure under my building. Drive, he said. Don't sit in a parking structure alone. Drive somewhere. Where? A pause. Here, he said, simply, just that. She sat with that for a moment. Outside the car, the parking structure was dim and concrete and completely indifferent to her the way structures were. Chloe's going to want to tell me about sharks, she said. Probably. A slight warmth in his voice. She's been saving one, apparently. Something about deep-sea adaptations. That sounds alarming. She described it as exciting. Come. Ducked. She got there at 7:45. Landon opened the door before she knocked, which meant he'd heard the car. Chloe was at the kitchen table with her ocean biology book open to a page of black and white illustrations. She looked up when Avery came in. The goblin shark, she said, pointing, has a jaw that extends outside its face to catch prey. That's terrifying, Avery said. I know, isn't it amazing? Avery sat down at the table and looked at the illustration. The goblin shark was, objectively, deeply unsettling. A pale, loose-jawed creature designed by something that had never seen sunlight. It was also, looking at it through Chloe's eyes, genuinely fascinating. It lives in deep water, Chloe said, where there's no light, so it adapted different tools because the normal tools don't work there. It made do, Avery said. It made do better than made do, Chloe corrected. It found a whole different way. Avery looked at the illustration for a moment longer than necessary. Landon, from the kitchen where he was heating something on the stove, said nothing, but she had the sense he was listening. You're right, she said. That is amazing. Chloe nodded with satisfaction and turned a page. Turte. Landon put food in front of her without asking. Soup, something homemade, with bread on the side. And she ate it at the kitchen table while Chloe told her 3 more facts about deep-sea creatures and then announced she was going to read before bed, which Avery had learned was Chloe's diplomatic way of determining that the adults needed the room. 7 years old and practicing tact. She thought about that. After Chloe's light went off, she and Landon sat in the living room again, the lamp between them again, the street quiet outside. Henderson will push for the confidence vote, she said. Marcus thinks within the next 60 days. And you're ready for that? Yes. What do you need from me? He asked. Not performing, practically, just asking what was useful. She looked at him. The tiredness was still there, bone deep, but the weight of the day had distributed itself somehow since she'd walked through his door, and she wasn't sure how to account for it. Nothing right now. I just needed... She stopped. You needed not to be alone with it, he said. Yes. He nodded, no commentary, no reassurance she didn't ask for. She thought about what he'd said in the kitchen 2 weeks ago. I see you. She'd been carrying that around without meaning to, taking it out and looking at it in quiet moments, and then putting it away again carefully, the way you handled something you weren't sure how fragile it was. There's something I should have told you the first night, she said. He waited. The reason I agreed to a blind date when I hadn't done anything like that in 3 years. She looked at her hands. I was tired. Not professionally. I wasn't tired of the work. I was tired of walking into rooms and watching people rearrange how they treated me the second they knew the number. She paused. I wanted to sit across from someone who didn't know, just once, to see if I still... She stopped again. The sentence had an ending she hadn't spoken out loud before. To see if you still existed outside of it, he said quietly. She looked up at him. Yeah, she said. He was quiet for a moment. And? I had coffee with a man who told me I didn't owe him anything for having a normal reaction to being treated badly, she said. So? Something shifted in his face, the particular thing that happened right before he let something be real, when the careful management slipped slightly. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. Just that. A simple, deliberate hold. And Avery Sterling, who had voted 9-2 in a boardroom that morning and held her ground against a man with more lawyers than most countries, and who had not cried in a professional context in 6 years, felt something pull hard in her chest. She didn't cry, but it was a near thing. She turned her hand and held his back. I have to tell you something else, he said. She looked at him. When all of this came out, Meridian Cross, what they were doing to the company, his voice was level, but underneath it was something uneven and real. My crew, 6 guys. Marcus Tillman has a kid starting college next fall. Dion's been saving for a house for 2 years. He stopped. I couldn't fix it, and I needed to be able to fix it. Landon, I'm not saying you shouldn't have helped. I'm saying... He rubbed his face with his free hand. I'm saying it was hard to need saving. I'm telling you that because you were honest with me, and I want to be honest with you. She held his gaze. I know, she said. I know it was. Yeah. For what it's worth, she said carefully, you weren't being saved. You were being... She looked for the right word. You were being leveled. The field was rigged, and someone straightened it. He was quiet. You did the work, she said. You built the company. You passed every inspection. You hired Marcus Tillman and Dion and the rest of them, and you kept them. That's not saving. That's the playing field working the way it was supposed to. He looked at their hands, joined on the cushion between them. You're good at this, he said. At what? At saying the true thing without making it soft. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. I've had practice. So have I. Outside, a car passed on the wet street and was gone. Landon didn't let go of her hand. She didn't let go of his, and the lamp sat between them, throwing light in both directions, the same as it had before, except that something between the two of them had shifted, quiet and irreversible, like a load-bearing wall that had finally been properly identified. Neither of them named it. Neither of them needed to. 3 days later, Harlan Cross released a public statement through his legal team calling the Sterling Board action reckless, evidence-thin, and motivated by a personal conflict of interest. The statement used the word inappropriate 4 times and the phrase serious professional concerns twice. It was, Avery noted, exactly as loud and exactly as empty as she'd predicted. What it didn't address, what it carefully stepped around with the practiced footwork of expensive legal writing,
was a single line of the documentation. Marcus sent it to her with a one-sentence message. He's not denying the facts. He's just naming them. She forwarded it to Ray Connors, Landon's accountant, with a note. This is what a weak response looks like. Your counter-complaint is solid. File it. Ray filed it by end of day. 2 of the 4 affected contractors, the ones still in litigation, reached out to Marcus within 48 hours asking how to access the documentation. He sent it with the full sourcing attached. The 3rd contractor, the one who'd folded, called Landon directly. He was 58 years old and had spent 19 years building his operation before Meridian dismantled it in a matter of months. He talked for 11 minutes, and Landon mostly listened, and when the call ended, Landon sat in his truck outside a job site for a long time. He texted Avery afterward. He said, "Thank you. I didn't know what to say." She wrote back, "You didn't have to say anything. He just needed someone to hear it." A pause. Then, "You understand a lot about what people need." She read that 3 times. Then she typed, "I'm learning." She set the phone down and looked out her office window at the city, 42 floors. The Millhaven corridor visible in the distance if you knew where to look, the grid of streets, the mix of old buildings and new construction, and somewhere in there a warehouse on Keene Street with solid bones and an empty interior and a floor plan that had once been sketched on a napkin by a man who'd lost the napkin. It was still there. She'd already put in a second call to Greenpath Holdings. This time, someone had picked up. The confidence vote came on a Thursday in late February, 41 days after the shareholder meeting. Henderson had spent those 41 days being efficient about it. He'd worked the phones, called in favors, had lunches with board members that he didn't mention to Avery because he didn't have to. She wasn't owed advance notice of a vote, just the vote itself. She tracked it the way she tracked most things she couldn't directly control, through the people around it, through the quality of the silences, through the specific way certain board members stopped making eye contact in the hallway. By the first week of February, she had a reliable count. Henderson had his 4. Park had moved to 5. 2 others were soft. Brennan, who was 67 and had been genuinely close to Cross socially, and Webb, who cared primarily about short-term share performance and had not loved the Q1 projection conversation. That put the potential ceiling at 7. Exactly enough. She told Marcus her count on a Monday morning. "Mine is the same," he said. Brennan? Brennan had dinner with Cross's attorney 2 weeks ago. I'd call him a 6. Webb? Still soft. But the Q1 numbers came in better than the mitigation model projected. That helps. She nodded. How much better? 4% over projection. The Ellison contract filled most of the Meridian gap faster than expected. Make sure Webb sees that clearly before Thursday. I already sent it to his office this morning, Marcus said. With a note. She looked at him. What kind of note? The kind that says Q1 came in at 4% above the adjusted projection and attaches the supporting figures. He allowed himself a slight raise of his eyebrow. I've been doing this for a while. She didn't smile, but it was a near thing. What's your read on the final number? 7-5, he said. Henderson's way. Possibly 8-4 if Brennan holds, but the threshold is 7. He paused. It'll be close. She turned to the window. The city was doing February things. Gray, cold, the particular exhaustion of a month that had gone on too long. I'm not stepping down, she said. It wasn't defiance. It was just fact, stated clearly for the record. I know, Marcus said. I'm also not changing the recommendation or walking back the documentation. I know that too. So we go in Thursday and we count. Yes, he said. We do. She didn't tell Landon about the vote count until Wednesday night. They were at his kitchen table, Chloe in bed, the lamp on, the radiator going, and she laid it out the same way she laid everything out with him. Straight, factual, no softening and no inflation. 7-5, possibly 8-4. Henderson needed 7. She had 6 solid votes in her column and 2 she was watching. Landon listened with both hands around his tea. Tell me what happens if it goes the wrong way, he said when she finished. I stay on as CEO for 90 days during a transition period. The board appoints an interim. I negotiate my exit package, which is contractually defined. She said it evenly.
She'd run the scenario often enough that the words had lost their texture. And Sterling Technologies continues to operate. It's a $4 billion company. It doesn't need me to function. She paused. I'd like to think it functions better with me, but it doesn't need me. He looked at her. Do you believe that? That it doesn't need you? I believe it's true, she said. Needing to believe something and it being true are different things. He was quiet for a moment, the way he got when he was deciding whether to say the next thing. I know what it would mean to you, he said, if it goes wrong. I just want you to know that I know. She held his gaze. It was one of the things about him that she'd stopped being surprised by and started simply being grateful for. The way he didn't rush to minimize difficult things. He didn't say it'll be fine or you'll land on your feet or any of the phrases people said when they wanted the difficult thing to be over. He just acknowledged the weight of it and held it with her. I know, she said. Thursday came cold and clear, the sky a hard February blue that had no warmth in it. Avery was at her desk by 7. She worked through 2 hours of regular business, a vendor negotiation, a product roadmap review, with the same attention she brought to everything, because the alternative was sitting with the vote, and sitting with the vote was not useful. At 9:45, she walked down 2 floors to the boardroom. The room filled the same way it always did. Henderson came in at 1 minute to 10 and took his chair without looking at her. Park sat 2 down from him. Chen, at the other end, nodded at her the way he had in January. Webb came in last, 30 seconds before the hour, and his expression as he sat down was carefully neutral, which she read as uncertain, which she read as not yet decided, which she filed. The vote was the second item on the agenda, which was Henderson's doing. He'd requested the placement, and she'd let him have it, because she wasn't going to fight over meeting order. Henderson presented his case for 12 minutes. He was measured and professional and made 3 legitimate points about the pace of the Meridian decision and the Q1 exposure and the principle of board consultation before major partnership actions. He did not once reference the documentation or the 4 contractors or Harlan Cross's coordinated campaign, which was either a strategic choice or an acknowledgement that those things could not be addressed cleanly. She suspected both. When he finished, Chen spoke first from her side of the table. 4 minutes, precise. Citing the Q1 overperformance, the legal soundness of the documentation methodology, and the precedent of ethical action in situations exactly like this one. Okafor followed with 2 minutes on fiduciary responsibility, which cut directly at Henderson's process argument. Avery spoke last, from her chair, without standing. I made a decision in January that I believed was right, and that I still believe is right, she said. The documentation has not been challenged on its merits because it cannot be challenged on its merits. The Q1 numbers came in better than projected. The legal exposure from inaction would have been substantially higher than the exposure from action. She looked around the table. I'd make the same call today. She stopped there. She didn't appeal, and she didn't perform. She'd said what was true, and she let it stand. Henderson called the vote. The room went through it, member by member, in the formal way. She counted as it went. Henderson, 4. Park, 4. Brennan, a pause. 4. That was 6. She was at 3. Webb, against. That was 4 for her. The next 3 went against Henderson in a row. 7 for her. The remaining 2 split. 1 for Henderson, 1 against. Final count, 7-5. Her way. The chair noted the result. Henderson closed his folder. The room began the small movements that followed a concluded vote, papers gathering, chairs adjusting, people deciding what their faces would do in the next 10 seconds. She looked at Henderson directly. He met her eyes across the table. Something in his expression was not quite gracious, but was, she gave him credit for this, not ugly either. He was a man who operated within process. The process had produced a result. He would proceed accordingly. Thank you, she said to the room, and meant it without triumph. Toshom, she called Landon from the elevator. 7-5, she said. She heard him let out a breath, a slow one, like it had been held for a while. Avery? I'm fine. And she was, she realized. The tiredness was there. It was always there. But beneath it was something solid, something that hadn't moved, and she'd been quietly monitoring for it through the whole morning to make sure it was still there. It was still there. "Come tonight," he said. "Chloe's been asking about you, and I made something with the slow cooker that I need a second opinion on." She almost laughed. "Is the second opinion about whether it's edible?" "Partially. I'll be there at 7. February became March, and March brought the first real progress on the Keene Street building. Greenpath Holdings had eventually produced a contact who had produced a lease agreement, which Avery's legal team had reviewed and Landon had walked through with Ray, and which now sat, signed by both parties, in a folder in Landon's filing cabinet at home. The warehouse on Keene Street, solid bones, original timber ceiling joists, 3,000 square feet of floor space that had not seen active use in 4 years, was, on paper, the future home of the Millhaven Community Learning Center. The word future was doing a lot of work in that sentence. Landon understood the distance between a signed lease and a functioning center better than almost anyone. He'd done the site walkthrough in early March. The first time he'd been inside the building he'd looked at from the outside for 2 years. And he'd spent 2 hours moving through the space with a flashlight and his own trained eye, touching walls, checking load points, looking at the water damage in the northeast corner, and the electrical panel that was 3 decades past any reasonable lifespan, and the floor joists that needed sistering on the south end. It was a lot of work. It was exactly the kind of work he knew how to do. He came out of that walkthrough with 6 pages of notes and a handwritten cost estimate that he revised 3 times before he was satisfied it was honest, and he brought it to Avery on a Sunday afternoon, spread out on her kitchen table this time. Her place, which he'd been to 4 times now, and which was enormous and had a view of the city that still mildly startled him each time. And a kitchen she clearly used rarely, though she'd made coffee that morning that was genuinely good. She read his estimate carefully. She asked 2 questions, both about the electrical and the northeast corner specifically, and her questions were informed enough that he looked at her. "You've been doing research," he said. "I had some time." She turned another page. "The structural questions I pulled from a renovation guide. The electrical code questions I asked someone." "Who?" "A person I know who does large-scale building projects." She looked up. "Does that bother you?" He thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "It would have, a few months ago." "Why?" "Because a few months ago I would have read it as you managing the project from above. Now I read it as you doing your homework." He paused. "There's a difference." She held his gaze for a moment. "How long did it take you to get there?" "Honestly, about 6 weeks of thinking." "That's not that long." "It felt longer," he said, which was not a complaint, just true. She looked back at the estimate. "The northeast corner is the biggest variable. Yeah, I need to get a structural engineer in before I can give you a real number on that section. The visible damage might be surface. It might not be." "Assume it's not," she said, "for planning purposes. Assume the worst case and work from there. That adds about 40,000 to the estimate." "I know." She turned the last page, set the packet down evenly. "I want to fund the renovation directly, not through a grant process. Pearson Company does the work, at full rate, no adjusted contractor discount." He looked at her. "That's not how this was supposed to go," he said carefully. "How was it supposed to go?" "The center was supposed to be a community project, grants, some fundraising, maybe a few local sponsors. He stopped. "I wasn't planning on it being an Avery Sterling project." She was quiet for a moment. "I understand the distinction," she said. And she did. He could tell she did, which was one of the things about her. "What if the funding is through the Sterling Technologies Community Development Foundation? It's a separate legal entity. Your name is on the project. Your crew does the work. The foundation provides the capital." He looked at the estimate on her kitchen table. "You've already looked into the foundation structure," he said. "Yes." "When?" 3 weeks ago." He sat back in his chair. "You're always about 3 weeks ahead of me." "I think faster than I talk," she said. "That's not always a virtue." He looked at her. She was watching him with that careful attention, not pushing, not performing patience, just genuinely waiting. "Let me think about it," he said. "Okay?" "That's not a no." "I know," she said. "I've learned to tell the difference." The thing Landon had not fully anticipated was how much Chloe was paying attention to all of it. He should have anticipated it. He knew his daughter, but he'd been so inside his own processing. The company, the counter-complaint that Ray had now filed and which was moving slowly through the machinery of the legal system the way such things moved, the Keene Street plans, Avery, that he'd been watching Chloe in the peripheral way that parents sometimes did when they had too many things to carry at once, tracking her happiness and her homework and her shark facts without quite seeing the larger picture she was assembling on her own. The picture became visible one evening in late March. He came home from the job site later than usual. A subcontractor had miscommunicated about a delivery window, and the afternoon had cascaded from there, and found Chloe at the kitchen table with her notebook. Not the shark notebook, a different one, spiral-bound, that he hadn't seen before. "What's that?" he asked, dropping his keys on the counter. She closed it quickly. "Nothing." He looked at her. She was a bad liar, always had been. She got a specific expression when she was being evasive, a kind of studied casualness that she hadn't yet learned to make convincing. "Chloe." "It's a plan," she said with resignation. "A plan for what?" She opened it. The notebook was filled with handwriting, hers, careful and earnest, and what appeared to be a schedule with names and times, and a hand-drawn map of what he recognized, with a jolt, as the Keene Street building. The exterior of it, anyway, with arrows and labels. Kids' room here, reading corner, tables for homework. Several pages in, there was a list of names. Classmates, he realized. Her friends and their parents, teachers from her school. And next to many of the names, small check marks. "Did you already talk to these people?" he said. "Some of them," she said carefully. He looked at her. "About what?" "About the learning center." She met his eyes with the steadiness that was so distinctly hers, that straight-on look that never quite fit a 7-year-old face. "I know you've been worrying about it, the funding and the plans and all of it, and I know you and Avery have been figuring it out." She looked down at the notebook. "I just thought, if the community was already part of it from the beginning, then it would feel more like everybody's, not just—" She paused, searching for words. "Not like it got handed down. Like it grew up from people who needed it." Landon sat down across from her. He looked at the notebook, the hand-drawn map, the lists of names with their small, earnest check marks. His daughter had been conducting her own quiet operation for— He checked the first page, which had a date. 6 weeks. "You've been doing this for 6 weeks, he said. "I was waiting until I had enough to show you," she said. "I didn't want to get your hopes up before I knew it was real." Something in his chest pulled hard. He thought about what Avery had said once, about Chloe. She talks like someone who's been paying attention to much more than anyone told her to. He'd laughed at the time. He wasn't laughing now. "Chloe," he said. "I know I should have asked you first," she said. "I'm sorry for that part." "That part," he agreed. "You should have asked." He looked at the notebook. "The rest of it, the idea of it, is the smartest thing I've heard in months." She looked up. "The community being part of it from the start," he said. "That's—" He stopped. "That's exactly right." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can I show Avery?" "Yeah," he said. "I think you should." He called Avery that night after Chloe was in bed. He told her about the notebook. He didn't editorialize, just described what he'd seen, the map, the lists, the 6 weeks of quiet work. There was a silence on her end when he finished that was different from her usual silences, softer at the edges. "She's been doing this since February?" Avery said. "The first page is dated February 9th. That's—" Another pause. "Landon, that's a week after the board vote." He hadn't put those two dates together. He sat with it for a moment. "She was worried about you," he said. "She didn't say it directly, but she knew you were going through something hard. I think this was her way of doing something about it," Avery said quietly. "Yeah." The line was quiet for a moment, not uncomfortable, the kind of quiet that had something in it. "Can I come Saturday?" Avery said. "She said she wanted to show me." "That's why I called," he said. Saturday came rainy and cold, the last gasp of winter trying to make its presence known, before March gave way. Avery arrived at 11 with a bag of groceries, which had become a habit. She showed up with food the way some people showed up with flowers, as a practical expression of something she didn't always put in words. Chloe was at the table with the notebook before Avery had her jacket off. She presented it with the focused gravity of someone delivering a proposal, which, Landon thought, watching from the kitchen doorway, was exactly what it was. She walked Avery through the map, the names, the schedule she'd drafted for the community event, a one-afternoon gathering at the Keene Street site, nothing elaborate, just people coming to see the space and feel part of something before the renovation started. Teachers, parents, families from the neighborhood. She'd even drafted a handwritten flyer which she'd shown to her art teacher, who had apparently offered to help make copies. Avery listened to all of it without interrupting. She asked 3 questions. About the date Chloe had in mind, about the families on the list who lived farthest from Keene Street, about whether she'd thought about what to do if it rained. "I have a rain backup," Chloe said immediately, producing a second page. Avery looked at the rain backup. "Chloe," she said, "this is a very good plan." Chloe visibly measured whether this was a real assessment or an adult being nice assessment. She appeared to conclude it was real. "There's one more thing," Chloe said. She turned to the last page of the notebook. It was a list. Things the Learning Center needs to be real. Number 1, building. Number 2, money for the building. Number 3, someone to fix the building. Number 4, people who will show up. She looked at Avery, then at her father. "You have the building," she said, pointing to number 1. "Avery has the money." Number 2. "Dad has the crew." Number 3. She tapped number 4. "This part is mine." Landon looked at his daughter for a long moment. She was 7. She had a spiral notebook with a hand-drawn map and a rain backup plan, and she had divided the problem into 4 parts and assigned each one to the correct person without being asked to. "When did you figure all this out?" he said. "The night you came home late," she said. "The subcontractor night. You looked really tired, and I thought—" She shrugged in the way kids shrugged when they were trying to make something feel smaller than it was. "I thought that if I could do the part that was mine, you wouldn't have to be as tired." He stood in the kitchen doorway, and he did not trust himself to speak for a moment. Avery, at the table, had her hands wrapped around the coffee mug. She was looking at Chloe with an expression that was completely unguarded, the inventory eyes soft and entirely without their usual calculation. "You did the part that was yours," Avery said. "You did it well." Chloe accepted this with a nod. Then she looked at both of them. "Are you two going to be okay?" she asked. Landon blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Chloe gestured between them in the specific way of a child who has observed something and is declining to be subtle about it. "You keep almost saying things to each other and then not saying them. It makes the air feel strange." Avery made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Landon looked at the ceiling briefly. "We're okay, Chloe." "You should say the things," Chloe said. "It's easier." "Is it?" "Yes." She picked up her notebook with the matter-of-fact air of someone who had delivered important information and was now moving on. "I'm going to read. You can have the kitchen." She walked down the hallway and closed her door. The kitchen was quiet. Avery was looking at her coffee mug, and the expression on her face was the one he'd first seen at Briar and Bean. The moment just before the smile, when the decision was still being made. Except it had been months now, and he knew her better than he had then, and he knew the decision was not about the smile. It was about something larger than the smile, something she'd been holding carefully for a long time. "She's not wrong," Avery said, not looking up. "No," he agreed. "She usually isn't." He crossed the kitchen and sat down across from her. "The things we keep almost saying," he said. She looked up then. "Yeah," she said. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. He looked at her, Schatz, really looked, the way he'd looked at buildings and plans and the things that mattered. And he said it. "I love you," he said, flat and real, no performance. "I'm not in a hurry. I'm not asking you for anything right now. I just want you to know that I know what this is, and I know it's not nothing." Avery held his gaze. He watched the careful management slip. Not collapse. She wasn't built for collapse. But slip. The way a door opened.
controlled and deliberate and terrifying all at once. "I love you too," she said, quietly, like she was testing the weight of it in the air. It held. Neither of them moved toward the other. They just sat there in the kitchen, with the rain on the window and the radiator going and Chloe's door closed at the end of the hall, and they let the thing they'd said stay in the room with them until it was real. "Okay," Landon said finally. "Okay," she said back. The rain came harder against the glass. Somewhere on the street, a car splashed through a puddle and was gone. The apartment was warm in the specific way of a place built around someone living in it. Not designer warm, not intentional, just the accumulated warmth of ordinary days. Avery looked down at the notebook still on the table. The hand-drawn map of Keene Street. Kids' room here. Reading corner. Tables for homework. "The community event," she said. "Chloe's plan." "Yeah. I want to help with it." She looked up. Not visibly. Not as a Sterling event. Just... She stopped. "Just as a person," he said. "Just as a person," she confirmed. He looked at her. The morning light was doing something particular to the way she looked. All the professional armor set down on the floor somewhere. And she was just a woman at a kitchen table with both hands around a coffee mug, in the house of a man who'd learned her in the slow and unhurried way that things that mattered deserved to be learned. "You know," he said, "that you already are that." She looked at him. "A person," he said. "Just a person. You've been that the whole time. You were that before I knew anything else." The door at the end of the hall stayed closed. The rain kept on. And Avery Sterling, who had built a billion-dollar company and held a boardroom and stared down a confidence vote without blinking, sat very still at Landon Pierce's kitchen table and felt something unlock in her chest that she hadn't known was locked. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't the clean satisfaction of a vote going 7-5 or a quarterly projection beat or a contract signed. It was smaller than all of those things, and it was much, much larger. She didn't have a word for it yet. She thought, with the part of her brain that was always running the numbers, that she had time to find one. The community event happened on a Saturday in April, and it rained. Not hard. A thin, persistent drizzle that had been going since the night before and showed no particular intention of stopping. Chloe had prepared for this. She had her rain backup, which turned out to be a series of borrowed pop-up canopies that she'd arranged with the parents of 3 school friends. And by 9 in the morning, Landon and 2 members of his crew were in the parking lot of the Keene Street warehouse, setting up poles and canopy frames while Chloe directed from under her purple jacket hood with the quiet authority of someone who had planned for exactly this contingency. Further apart, she told Marcus Tillman, who was 6'2" and had been in construction for 15 years, and took this instruction from a 7-year-old without visible objection, because he had daughters of his own and recognized a certain kind of competence. "How much further?" he asked. "Enough for the table," she pointed. "The sign-in table goes there." Marcus shifted the canopy pole 3 feet to the left. "Like that?" Chloe examined it. "Yes." Landon, threading the crossbar into its fitting, watched his daughter manage logistics and thought about the February night when he'd found the notebook and about how much ground they had all covered since then. 4 months from signed lease to this, canopies in a drizzle, folding tables from the church down the street that Pastor Ames had lent them without being asked for anything in return, a stack of paper flyers that Chloe's art teacher had indeed copied, and which were slightly crooked on the fold but very earnest in their design. Avery arrived at 9:30. She came in her own car, not the town car her company provided for professional appearances, her own car, the one she drove herself on weekends, a gray sedan with a parking permit for her building's garage, and a coffee cup in the holder and a canvas bag in the back seat. She parked on the street and came through the gate, and she was wearing the same charcoal jacket from the night at Briar and Bean, the one that had seen some weather, and she was carrying a large cardboard box. "What's in it?" Landon asked. "Supplies," she said. "Art supplies mostly. Paper, colored pencils, some things for kids to draw with. I thought if children were coming, they'd want something to do." He looked at the box. "You went to the craft store?" "Last night." "At what time?" She looked at him. "Stores are open late." "Avery?" 8:30, she said, without apology. "It was fine. Put me somewhere useful." He put her at the children's table,
which was 2 folding tables pushed together under the largest canopy, and she spent the first hour setting up art materials with Chloe, who had opinions about arrangement that Avery accepted or negotiated depending on whether they were reasonable, which Chloe found deeply satisfying. By 10 o'clock, the table had colored pencils sorted by color family, stacks of white paper, and a roll of butcher paper taped to the side of the building under the canopy overhang, with a sign above it that said, in Chloe's handwriting, "Draw what you want this place to be." The first families started arriving at 10:15. By 11, there were 60 people in and around the parking lot. By noon, there were close to 120. Landon had expected maybe 40. He'd told Chloe 40 was a good goal, and she'd said, "I have more names than that on my list." And he'd smiled the way parents smiled when they wanted to be encouraging without setting up disappointment, the way he'd smiled when she'd said she was going to read the full ocean biology book before 5th grade, prepared to be wrong and fine with it either way. He was wrong. The families that came were the families of Millhaven in the way that Millhaven actually was, not the version of the neighborhood that appeared in development reports and acquisition maps, the sanitized grid of properties and projected values, but the actual version. The Garza family, whose kids went to Chloe's school, and whose eldest had been doing homework at the public library 3 nights a week because their apartment didn't have reliable internet. The Nguyen's, who ran the dry cleaning shop on 5th, and whose teenage son had tested into an advanced math program and had no consistent tutoring access. Dion Washington's wife and their 2 young daughters, because Dion had told his wife about the center, and she'd told neighbors, and the neighbors had come. Marcus Tillman brought his daughter, who was 15 and serious-faced, and spent 45 minutes at Chloe's art table drawing a floor plan of a library with labeled sections, and then left it on the butcher paper roll without comment. Teachers came. Avery had not expected the teachers, but 3 of them showed up, brought by the same art teacher who'd copied the flyers, and they stood in a cluster near the building entrance with cups of coffee from the folding table thermos and talked to each other and to Landon about what they were short on, what the kids in their classrooms were missing, what a space like this could do if it was built right. Landon listened to all of it. He had his notebook out, not Chloe's spiral-bound one, his own contractor's notebook, worn at the corners, and he was making notes, not building notes, people notes, what they said they needed, what came up twice, what came up 6 times. Avery watched him do this from the children's table, between helping a 5-year-old get the cap off a red-colored pencil and talking to a woman named Patricia, who had 3 kids and worked nights, and whose voice, when she described wanting a safe place for her children to do homework in the hours between school and her getting home, had a tiredness in it that was not self-pity, just reality, just the honest shape of a life being managed as carefully as possible with insufficient tools. "This space," Patricia said, looking at the warehouse building, "if it was open, if there were people here, regular people, not just a program that starts and stops." "It will be," Avery said. Patricia looked at her. "You sure about that?" Avery looked at Landon, 20 feet away, listening to the 3 teachers with his notebook open. She looked at the butcher paper roll on the side of the building, which was filling up. Drawings, words, a child's rendering of bookshelves, someone's careful handwriting that said, "A place to breathe." "Yes," she said. "I'm sure." "Yeah." The rain stopped at 1 in the afternoon as if someone had turned off a tap. The clouds didn't clear entirely. They just thinned, and the light came through pale and clean, the way spring light did when it had been held back for a while and was finally allowed through. People who had been clustered under canopies drifted out into the parking lot and the drizzle-darkened sidewalk. A few children ran in the open space near the gate, the way children ran whenever a contained space suddenly expanded. Chloe had been in motion all morning. Landon checked on her every 20 minutes or so, not hovering, just tracking, and each time he found her in a different configuration, explaining the floor plan to a group of parents, helping a small boy draw a shark on the butcher paper, sitting cross-legged on the ground with Marcus Tillman's daughter, looking at something in the notebook together. At 1:30, he found her standing near the building entrance with Avery, both of them looking up at the exterior wall. "The sign goes there," Chloe was saying, pointing at the space above the main door. "Big enough to see from the street." "What does the sign say?" Avery asked. Chloe thought about it. Millhaven Community Learning Center, she said. Then, but that's long. We can shorten it. Maybe just the Millhaven Center, Chloe said. So it belongs to the whole neighborhood, not just one part. Avery was quiet for a moment. That's good, Chloe. I know, Chloe said without arrogance. She said it the way someone said it when they'd thought about something carefully and arrived at an honest conclusion. Landon, coming up beside them, caught Avery's eye over Chloe's head. She had the expression she sometimes got when Chloe said something that landed, a kind of arrested attention, like a person who has heard something they needed to hear and is noting where it hit. He put his hand on Chloe's shoulder. You did good today, he said. She looked up at him. We did good, she said. It's not just me. The renovation started in May. Pearson Company took the warehouse on Keene Street apart and began putting it back together the right way, which was slow and expensive and exactly what the building needed. The northeast corner was worse than Landon's initial estimate. The moisture damage ran deeper than the surface showed, and 3 of the floor joists had to be replaced entirely rather than sistered. And he called Avery with the revised number on a Tuesday morning from the job site, standing in the corner in question with sawdust on his boots. How much over? She asked. He told her. Okay, she said. No hesitation. That was fast. I've been expecting it. The northeast corner always costs more than you think. You've done this before? I've funded 3 building renovations through the foundation, she said. The northeast corner always costs more. I don't know why. It's a universal law. He looked at the corner. The exposed joists, the new subfloor waiting to go down, the light coming in through a window that was currently covered with plastic sheeting. We're on track everywhere else. I know. Dion sends me photos. He stopped. Dion sends you photos. Every Friday. Progress shots. I asked him to. A beat. I didn't tell you because I thought you'd feel managed. He thought about that. I don't feel managed. Good, she said. Dion's got a good eye. He looked at the corner again. We're going to be done by September, he said. Maybe August if the electrical goes smoothly. Then aim for August, she said. Chloe's already planning the opening. He knew she was because Chloe had begun a 3rd notebook. The first was the shark one. The second was the community event plan. The third was the Millhaven Center opening, and it had been going since April, which meant it had a 4-month head start on his construction timeline. He'd looked at it once, briefly, without her permission, which he felt mildly guilty about, but not guilty enough to not look. It had a guest list. It had a seating arrangement. It had a section titled Things to Say that was organized by person: Dad, Avery, Ms. Chen from the school, 2 of the parents from the April event, with notes about what each person should cover so there wasn't overlap. It had a section on food that had clearly been influenced by the baking show, which he chose not to think about too hard. At the bottom of the last filled page, in Chloe's careful handwriting, she'd written something that he kept thinking about afterward. Not a plan item, more like a note to herself. This is how things get built. Someone imagines it. Someone makes it real. Everyone shows up. He didn't know when she'd written it. He didn't know if she'd read it somewhere or made it up. He just knew that he'd been standing in his daughter's room at 11 at night with a flashlight looking at a spiral notebook, and those 3 sentences had hit him with a weight that he hadn't been prepared for. He closed the notebook. He went to bed. He lay in the dark for a long time, thinking about Julia. Not with the sharp edges that the early years had, but with the softer recognition of someone who had moved through grief honestly and arrived at a place where memory was not all loss. Julia had been funny and stubborn and had a particular laugh that he still heard sometimes in quiet rooms. She would have had opinions about Avery, strong ones probably, and mostly accurate ones because Julia had been good at people in the way that some people were just built to be. He thought about what she would have said. He thought, honestly, letting himself think it, that she would have said, "You're allowed to be happy, Landon." That was always the deal. He wasn't sure if that was her voice or his own. He suspected it was both. The legal resolution came in June. The countercomplaint that Ray had filed in January moved through the system with the grinding slowness of all legal processes, And then, in the second week of June, it moved suddenly and quickly, the way these things sometimes did when the other side ran out of road. Harlan Cross's attorneys reached out to Ray with a settlement proposal on a Tuesday. Ray forwarded it to Landon with a 2-line note. They want it quiet. Read the number before you call me. Landon read the number. He called Ray. This is real? He said. It's real, Ray said. They don't want it to go further. The documentation Avery's team compiled, once that's in litigation discovery, it becomes public record in a way that's very hard to control. Cross wants it contained. The other contractors, Landon said immediately. The 3 others. I know, Ray said. I already called the attorney from the litigation case. They want to be part of the settlement discussion. What about the one who folded? Ray was quiet for a moment. That's harder. His business is gone. Settlement funds can compensate, but they don't rebuild. A pause. He'll be included. The number will reflect all 4 cases. Landon sat in his truck outside the Keene Street site, looking at the building. You could see the progress from the street. New windows in, the exterior cleaned up, the main entrance framing replaced. It looked different. It looked like it was becoming something. Ray, he said. Yeah. Tell them we'll settle if all 4 contractors are included and the documentation goes into the industry oversight record regardless. Not buried, not sealed. A pause. That's going to make them push back. Let them push back. He could hear Ray writing something down. Any flexibility on the documentation condition? No, Landon said. Ray pushed back on his behalf for 9 days. Cross's team pushed back on the documentation condition specifically, which told Landon everything he needed to know about where the real exposure was. They went back and forth through intermediaries, and on a Friday morning in the 3rd week of June, Cross's attorneys accepted. All 4 contractors included. Documentation to the Industry Oversight Board, not sealed. The number, divided according to damages, was significant enough that Landon sat very still in Ray's office for almost a minute after he signed. You okay? Ray said. Yeah, Landon said. He put the pen down. 3 years ago, I didn't know if I could make payroll in December. And now, Ray said, and let that be the whole sentence. The Millhaven Center opened on the 14th of August. The electrical had cooperated. The floors were done. The northeast corner had cost what it cost and was solid and dry and finished in the same wide plank oak as the rest of the space. The children's room was on the south end, the way Chloe's map had drawn it, with good light and low shelving and tables at the right height for kids who needed to sit for an hour and actually concentrate. The reading area had the corner Chloe had labeled and 3 donated armchairs that didn't match each other and were therefore exactly right. The main floor had 12 work tables and a resource wall and a technology alcove with 12 computers that Avery had sourced through a Sterling Foundation equipment grant and that were current generation and properly installed, not the surplus and good luck variety that too many community spaces ended up with. There was a sign above the main door that said, "The Millhaven Center," in clean, simple letters, large enough to see from the street, belonging to the whole neighborhood. The morning of the opening, Landon got there at 6:30. He walked through the whole building alone in the early light, the main floor, the children's room, the reading corner, the back office, where the center's first director, a woman named Sylvia Torres, who had 15 years of after-school program experience and an organizational capacity that made Chloe look casual, had already been working for 3 weeks. He walked through slowly and he looked at it, the way he looked at finished work, the way a person looked at something they'd built when they wanted to confirm that it was real. It was real. He stood in the children's room for a while, in the good light coming through the south windows, and he thought about the napkin he'd lost. The rough floor plan he'd sketched and never found again, the year that the dream had just been a shape in his head that he'd never told anyone about until a blind date in October at a cafe with string lights and an overheard conversation and a woman who pressed her hands around a coffee mug and listened like she meant it. He thought about what it meant to want something for 3 years and then have it arrive not the way you expected, but real. More real, actually, than the version you'd been imagining, because the version you imagine is always slightly abstract, slightly simplified. The building without the people in it, the dream without the friction of making it actual. The real version had friction and cost, and a northeast corner that went over budget and legal settlements and a 7-year-old's notebook and 60 hours of electrical work and a community event in a drizzle that he'd expected 40 people to attend. He would not have traded the real version for the clean one, not even a little. By noon, the center was full. Not over full. Sylvia had planned the opening carefully, inviting the April community event families first, along with the teachers who'd come to the parking lot, along with the 3 other contractors who had each received their settlement and 2 of whom were there in person, the third sending his wife because he lived 2 states away now and couldn't make the drive. The Garza kids were in the children's room within 4 minutes of the doors opening. Marcus Tillman's daughter found the reading corner and didn't leave it for 2 hours. Dionne Washington stood in the middle of the main floor and looked around with an expression that Landon recognized as the same one he'd had at 6:30 in the morning, confirming that it was real. "We built this," Dionne said. "Not to anyone in particular, just saying it." "We built it," Landon said. Avery was at the children's room table. This was not where anyone had placed her in any official capacity. There was no official capacity. She had no name on the program, no speech scheduled, no position at the front of any room. She'd made clear to Landon weeks ago that the opening was the centers and the communities, and she was there as a person, the same as anyone else. He told her he understood and that it mattered to him, and she'd said she knew, and that had been all they needed to say about it. But she was at the children's room table, and she had been there for an hour, and there were currently 4 children sitting with her, including 2 she'd never met before today, and she was showing them something on a piece of paper, some diagram, some drawing, and their faces were angled toward her with the specific attention of children who are genuinely interested, not performing interest for an adult. He stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment. She caught him watching and raised an eyebrow. He shook his head. Nothing, just looking. She went back to the children. He went back to the main floor. Chloe had been everywhere all day, which was her nature. She moved through the center with proprietary comfort, introducing people to each other when she thought they should know each other, pointing out features she'd been involved in planning, telling anyone who would listen about the children's room layout and why the tables were the right height. She was wearing the purple jacket because it was still her jacket, even in August, and she'd pushed the sleeves up. At 3 in the afternoon, Landon found her in the children's room with Avery and a group of about 8 kids ranging from 5 to maybe 12, all of them gathered around the butcher paper that someone, he looked at the logistics and suspected Chloe, had arranged to have transferred from the April event and mounted on the children's room wall. Draw what you want this place to be. The April drawings were there, the library shelves, the floor plan, the handwriting that said a place to breathe. New drawings had been added. All morning, kids had been adding to it. Chloe was standing in front of the wall with her arms crossed, looking at all of it. "It worked," she said, when she heard him behind her. "Yeah," he said, "it did." She turned around and looked at him. Then she looked past him at Avery, who was finishing up something with the younger kids at the table. Then she looked back at her father. "Dad," she said, "Chloe, are you going to do it today?" He blinked. "Do what?" She gave him the 7-year-old look that communicated more than most adults managed. "The thing in your jacket pocket," she said. "I found it this morning when I was looking for the measuring tape. The small box." He looked at her. "I didn't open it," she said. "But I know what small boxes mean." He had spent 3 weeks deciding when. He had constructed and abandoned 4 different scenarios for the timing and the setting. He had told himself he'd wait for the right moment, by which he meant a moment that felt complete, not artificially staged, not planned to the point of performance, but real. He looked at his daughter, who had found the ring box that morning while looking for a measuring tape, and had said nothing about it all day, had gone through the entire opening carrying that knowledge, and managed her face and given him no sign. "You," he said, "are something else." "I know," she said. "Are you going to do it?" He looked at Avery. She was laughing at something one of the kids had said. A real laugh, surprised, the kind that arrived before she could manage it. And she was at a table in a children's room in a community center in Millhaven in the jacket that had seen some weather, with no camera on her, and no announcement, and nothing to gain by being here except the thing itself. "Yeah," he said to Chloe. "I think it's time." Chloe looked at him very seriously. "I have something," she said. She reached into the kangaroo pocket of her purple jacket and produced a folded piece of paper. She held it out to him. He unfolded it. It was a sign, handwritten in Chloe's careful print, in the blue marker she used for important things. 4 words. He looked at his daughter. I made it last week, she said, just in case. He waited until the afternoon had quieted slightly. The big arrival wave done, people settled into the space, a gentle hum of conversation and children's noise that was exactly what the building had been built to hold. He asked Sylvia to get everyone into the main room. She looked at him for a moment with a particular expression, then said, "Give me 10 minutes," and did it with the same organized efficiency she brought to everything. People gathered, 140, maybe a few more, without quite knowing why, but following the quiet instinct of a group that sensed something was happening. Chloe worked the children's room, moving kids into the main floor with the patient authority of someone who had managed this particular category of chaos before. Avery came through from the children's room last, slightly behind the general movement, not knowing why everyone was gathering. She found Landon at the front of the room and looked at him with the inventory eyes, doing the rapid assessment. He watched her realize. Her expression shifted, not a conclusion yet, just the approach of one. Her hands, at her sides, stilled. He crossed the room to her. Not the length of a stage, just the few feet between where she'd been standing and where he was standing, in the middle of a room full of the neighborhood that had shown up twice now when asked to. Landon, she said quietly, a question and not a question. He reached into his jacket pocket. He took out the box. And then he reached back and held out his other hand, and Chloe was there. She had been 6 feet behind him, because she was Chloe, and she had planned for this. And she put the folded sign in his hand, and he unfolded it and held it up. 4 words, in blue marker. Will you be ours? Avery read it. He watched her read it. Watched the careful management come fully undone. Not slowly, but all at once, the way something falls when it's finally allowed to. Her hand came up to her mouth. Her eyes went bright and immediate. He went down on one knee. The room had gone completely quiet. The specific, respectful silence of a group of people who understand they are witnessing something real and want to give it the air it needs. I'm not going to make a speech, he said. You'd know it was a speech. You notice things like that. He looked up at her. So I'll just say what's true. You sat across from me in a bad cafe in October and you listened like I mattered. And you've been doing that every day since. And I know who you are, and not the company, not the number. You. And I want to keep knowing you. Me and Chloe both. He paused. Will you be part of our family? Avery Sterling stood in the Millhaven Center on the day it opened, and she looked at the man on one knee in front of her, and at the sign in his hand, and at Chloe beside him, watching her with dark eyes and a careful expression that was barely containing whatever was behind it. She thought, in the fraction of a second before she answered, in the space between one breath and the next, about a cafe in October, and a table of people who'd laughed, and a man who'd stood up for her without a single thing to gain. She thought about coffee going cold and text messages late at night and a spiral notebook with a hand-drawn map. She thought about a boardroom at 10 in the morning and 9 to 5 and the cold parking structure and his voice saying, "Come here," without ceremony. She thought about, "I see you," said quietly at a kitchen table, and the way it had lodged in her chest like something that had always been meant to be there. She thought about 30 years of building things and never quite building this. "Yes," she said. She said it like she meant it, which she did, completely, with no reservation and no performance and no part of it withheld. The room came alive. Not in a managed way, in the real way. The way rooms came alive when something true happened inside them. People cheered and clapped, and a few of the younger children, not entirely certain what was happening but responding to the energy, added their own noise to it. Dion Washington put 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled. Marcus Tillman laughed. Sylvia Torres pressed her hand to her chest with an expression that suggested she was going to need a moment. Landon stood up. He opened the box. The ring was simple and deliberate. Not a statement, not an advertisement, just a thing chosen carefully by a man who'd been paying attention. And he put it on her finger and she looked at it, and then she looked at him. Chloe, who had been holding herself together with considerable effort for approximately 90 seconds, abandoned all restraint and wrapped her arms around both of them at once. which given the geometry of the situation meant her face was between their midsections and she didn't care at all. Landon's arm went around her. Avery's arm went around her too, and then around Landon, and the three of them stood there in the middle of the room while the noise of the community went on around them, and none of them moved to separate for a long time. There is something that nobody tells you about the life you're building while you're busy trying to survive. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a clear before and after. It accumulates in small things: a text message at 9:47 at night, a sleeping child in a museum cafe, a notebook with a hand-drawn map, a coffee cup turned in a slow circle. It lives in the ordinary stuff: the Tuesday evenings and the kitchen table conversations, and the drive home in the dark when you're too tired to think straight, but you think anyway. It shows up in the moments when someone chooses to stand up for you in a room full of strangers and has nothing to gain by doing it. Landon Pierce spent 3 years after Julia died believing that the best parts of his life had already happened. He was not a dramatic man. He was not given to self-pity. He just looked at the evidence as it existed and arrived at what seemed like a reasonable conclusion: that some people got their great love once, and he had gotten his. And the work now was to be a good father and build good things and not ask for more than that. He was wrong. He was specifically, thoroughly, instructively wrong. And he is glad he was wrong in a way that he has no adequate words for, and so he doesn't try to find them. Avery Sterling spent 10 years building a company that was worth more than most people would see in 100 lifetimes, and she did it by being the smartest person in most rooms and working harder than almost everyone around her and understanding with cold clarity that the world would not hand her what she wanted just because she wanted it. She built it herself. She was proud of that. She remains proud of that. But she had started to confuse the building with the living, which is a mistake that driven people make in every generation, in every city, in every industry. The subtle and persistent confusion between the thing you've made and the life you're actually in. She had started to wonder, in the way you wondered about things at 30 in the small hours of the night, whether success was a place you arrived at or whether it was just motion, just forward movement that never quite landed anywhere you could stand still. The answer, she found, was that it depended on what you were moving toward. A small construction company owner with calloused hands and tired eyes, and a daughter who knew things about sharks, and a dream sketched on a napkin he'd lost. She hadn't been moving toward him. She hadn't known he existed. But she'd been moving toward the version of herself that could sit across from someone like him and be seen plainly, not as a title or a balance sheet, but as a person in a charcoal jacket who held her coffee cup with both hands and listened and was, occasionally, terrified. That's the version of herself she'd been building all along, underneath the company. She just hadn't known it. 1 year later, the Millhaven Center had 847 registered students, 14 after-school programs, a summer intensive that had filled its waitlist in 4 days, 3 full-time staff and a volunteer roster that Sylvia managed with the organizational precision she brought to everything. The northeast corner, fully repaired, was the children's reading nook. This was Chloe's decision, made on the grounds that a corner was the best reading spot, and the corner that had been hardest to fix deserved to become the best thing in the building. Nobody had a strong argument against this logic. Landon managed the facilities and the ongoing renovation partnerships. The center had expanded its scope to include 2 adjacent properties that the Sterling Foundation had acquired, a longer-term project that would double the floor space by the following year. He ran the project the way he ran all his projects, carefully, honestly, with 6 guys who showed up every day and did good work and trusted him, and with the specific satisfaction of someone building something that would outlast the building. Avery funded the scholarship program, 312 children across the city receiving educational support in the first year, the number growing. And she sat on the center's advisory board in a capacity that was exactly that, advisory. She gave input when asked. She did not run the room. This had required some adjustment because she was who she was. But she had gotten better at it, and Sylvia occasionally caught her eye across the advisory table in a way that said, "You're doing well," and she accepted that with more grace than she would have a year ago. Henderson retired from the Sterling board in the spring, 2 months after the annual report showed year-over-year growth of 14%. His retirement statement was professional and contained no bitterness, which she respected. Park remained on the board and had, in the months following the January vote, shifted his position in ways that were gradual and undramatic and real. This was how institutional things changed, not in declarations, but in the accumulation of small reorientations. Harlan Cross settled a civil complaint from the Industry Oversight Board in late spring. The settlement was not made public in its entirety, but the documentation remained in the industry record. The two contractors still in litigation had resolved their cases by April. The contractor who had folded did not rebuild his company, but the settlement gave him the ground to start something smaller and of his own design, which is a different thing but not a lesser one. The Keene Street building, the Millhaven Center, stood with its sign above the main door, readable from the street. The butcher paper from the April event was still on the children's room wall. More drawings had been added over the months. The original ones preserved in the middle, all those different hands and different visions overlapping into something that was richer than any single vision could have been. A place to breathe. Someone had written that, at the April event, in careful handwriting. It was still there. On the afternoon of the center's first anniversary, after the speeches and the tours and the children's program that Chloe had been planning in Notebook 3 since February, which came off with only one logistics problem that Sylvia solved in 6 minutes. After all of it, after the last families had filtered out into the warm August evening, the three of them stayed. Landon and Avery and Chloe in the children's room, in the good light from the south windows. Chloe was at the table with her notebook, the fourth one, which had started at some point in the spring and which Landon had not looked at and was not going to look at, writing something with focused attention. Avery was beside Landon, her shoulder against his, looking at the butcher paper wall. The ring on her hand caught the light in a small, ordinary way. "Are you happy?" he asked. Not performing the question, just asking. She looked at the wall, the drawings, the words, the layered evidence of people showing up and adding something and leaving it for whoever came next. "Yes," she said, the same way she'd said yes a year ago, without reservation, without performance, completely. He put his arm around her. Chloe looked up from her notebook, assessed the situation, and returned to her writing with the air of someone who had seen everything she needed to see. The light held. The building held. And in the children's room of the Millhaven Center on a warm August evening, a man who had stopped believing in more and a woman who had confused building with living sat together in the good light and were, simply and completely, home. That's not a small thing. In a world that moves fast and rewards the loud and the visible and the numbered, in a world where what you're worth and who you are get confused so often that most people stop noticing the difference. In that world, to find a person who sees you plainly and stays anyway, to build something that belongs to more than just you, to have a child look at you with dark eyes over a spiral notebook and say, "This is how things get built," that is not a small thing. It is, in fact, everything.